Hey, welcome to Firescale Audiobooks. If you enjoy our audiobooks, please consider subscribing to the channel. Also, feel free to share your review in the comments section below.
Asher followed Harold with measured steps, his demeanor calm and composed. Upon reaching the gathered trainees, Harold gestured silently to a spot on the ground, indicating where Asher should sit. The 10th son will now be joining the first training ground, Harold announced curtly before turning away. He had granted the trainees a brief respite, 5 minutes to catch their breath. Once that time passed, training would resume without delay. The trainees murmured among themselves. There was no need to introduce Asher. His reputation had long preceded him. The disgrace of the Duke's family was a well-known tale within the estate. Everyone present knew he shouldn't be here. By all rights, Asher belonged in the 3rd training ground. Yet, not a single voice rose to question his presence. And why would they? No one was foolish enough to speak out. Asher might be a disgrace, his awakening delayed until the 3rd attempt, but none of that changed the fact that he was a Sunday, a direct descendant of the Wargrave bloodline, the son of a duke. With a single word, he could make their lives far more difficult than they dared imagine. They cast fleeting glances at him from the corners of their eyes, breaths still labored, their gazes drawn to his flawless features. Some didn't bother to look at all, opting instead to sit cross-legged in a lotus position, using every second of the 5-minute reprieve to recover their strength. Asher remained silent. He knew none of them, and his gaze seemed distant, unfocused. But through his omniperception, he observed some of them without turning his head. They were uniformly dressed in form-fitting, compressed black shirts and trousers, men and women alike, just like the one he wore. As the final moments of rest slipped away, Harold's voice rang out from the sidelines. "On your feet. Begin." Without hesitation, the trainees rose and resumed their drills, not a single complaint uttered. Feet pounded rhythmically against the ground as they jogged, the sound echoing across the training field. Their breathing had steadied, if only slightly, and even those who had previously collapsed were now pushing forward, their bodies moving, if only barely. Asher moved with quiet precision, his footsteps falling in a steady rhythm against the ground. His body automatically adjusted effortlessly into a more perfect form as he jogged. He kept pace at the front alongside the other trainees, matching their stride with mechanical ease. This wasn't a race, nor was he trying to outshine anyone. The lingering stares at his back were of no concern to him. He simply mirrored their movements, focused and composed. Don't just jog, control your breathing. Inhale and exhale at steady, measured intervals. Harold's voice called out once more, sharp and brisk. Without warning, he appeared beside a trainee, his gaze piercing. "Why are you gasping like you've been running since birth?" he snapped. "Hold your breath for a few seconds, then begin breathing again, slowly and with control. I've told you before, regulating your breath helps condition and strengthen the body." After several more grueling minutes, Harold finally gave the command to stop. Many of the trainees collapsed to the ground without hesitation, gasping for air as they struggled to steady their breathing. Asher came to a smooth halt. He wasn't panting, nor did a single bead of sweat grace his skin. The duration had been far too short to challenge him. Without pause, they moved into the next series of physical conditioning drills. Harold offered no further rest. He had already granted them 5 minutes, and that was more than enough in his eyes. Yet none voiced a complaint. What right did they have? They were no strangers to the first training ground. Every drill, every demand, was familiar. These exercises weren't just for discipline. They were designed to strengthen the Astra veins, increasing their capacity to channel Astra while simultaneously developing the body to its limits. Everyone in this world is born with a naturally strong body. Then there is the passive benefit of the Astra veins. There's no such thing as a fragile fire mage who dies from a single strike. Asher thought as he moved through the drills, his motions controlled and efficient. But that didn't mean Asher had it easy. The physical conditioning was designed to push every trainee to their limits, and Harold made no exception. Noticing Asher's superior physique, he silently increased the intensity of his drills, pushing him harder than the rest. It didn't matter that Asher was a son. Harold had no intention of showing favoritism. Sweat began to roll down Asher's skin, his muscles burning and straining with each movement. His breathing instinctively adjusted, his body adapting under the pressure as he forced himself to keep going. Time wore on, and eventually, the sun reached its peak, marking the arrival of noon. The moment the session concluded, Harold vanished without a word, leaving behind only the fading echo of his demands. No one moved at first. The trainees remained where they were, seated together in silence, each one catching their breath and bracing themselves for the next round of training. Minutes slipped by in stillness, until, without a single command, everyone rose in unison and began walking toward a secondary door along the side of the field. Asher stood as well, wordless and composed, falling in a step behind them. They passed through the door, and another training field unfolded before Asher's eyes. At its center stood a towering structure built from an assortment of woods and reinforced planks, rising sharply toward the sky like a monument of discipline and pain. Boris had already briefed Asher on the nature of the first training ground. He knew the second phase of training focused on movement. The instructor appeared in a blurry frame of motion. Her sharp gaze swept across the assembled trainees, her presence commanding immediate attention. "Since we have a new face among us," she began, her voice calm but firm, "I'll go over the principles of movement training once more." Everyone knew who she meant. The unspoken consensus was clear. The new face was Asher. "The purpose of this movement training," she began, her voice loud and crisp, "is to stop you from swinging your weapons around like idiots. Countless people have died in battle not because they lacked power, but because their movement was trash." Her eyes narrowed as she continued. "Too many rush into learning advanced techniques without building a proper foundation. Some don't bother learning at all." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle over them like a silent warning. "When your hands and feet don't move in harmony, you're no better than a bird waiting to be slaughtered. I'm here to keep you from dying. I'll demonstrate once. Only once." Without another word, she turned and walked toward the towering structure. The instructor hadn't spared Asher so much as a greeting, nor was it expected. Once training began, even suns and moons were bound by the authority of their instructors. Rank and status held no weight within the boundaries of the training grounds. Discipline ruled, and formality had no place in the pursuit of strength. Harold's earlier acknowledgement of Asher had only occurred because he arrived alongside Boris. Had Asher come alone, Harold wouldn't have wasted a breath on pleasantries. He would have gone straight into the drills, as always. Upon reaching the structure, the instructor wasted no time. With a fluid motion, she leapt onto one of the poles, then began moving swiftly from one to the next, her strides precise and effortless, like a dancer gliding through choreography. Suddenly, a wooden arrow shot from within the structure. Without hesitation, her shoulder twisted, her body flowing in a seamless motion as she stepped onto the next pole, evading the projectile with elegant precision. More arrows rained down from the sides, but they posed no threat to her. She moved like a phantom, untethered by the chaos around her. To her, the poles were no different from solid ground, each step executed with uncanny ease. Suddenly, as her foot touched one of the poles, it wobbled beneath her, destabilizing as though attempting to break her rhythm. But she reacted instantly, springing off with practiced grace, landing lightly on the edge of another pole before leaping once more to the surface of the next. Arrows sliced through the air, each one missing her by mere inches, but never once touching her. Massive wooden logs and beams followed in swift succession, but none found their mark. Within seconds, she emerged at the far end of the structure, untouched, unbothered. She didn't turn back to them. She simply vanished, disappearing from sight without a sound. No words were needed. The trainees, understanding the message with perfect clarity, immediately began their own movement training. "This training focuses on movement and balance," Asher noted, his gaze fixed on a structure positioned off to the side as he began walking toward it. His mind effortlessly replayed every motion the instructor had performed, as though each step, twist, and leap had been ingrained in his mind. The battle intuition granted by the absolute physique, it's absurdly overpowered. He mused inwardly. Then, with a controlled motion, Asher leapt upward, landing firmly atop the first pole. He drew in a deep breath and slowly exhaled, steadying himself. Not long ago, he had been just an ordinary person, but all of that had changed, and he had come to terms with it. Whatever trials lay ahead, he would face them head-on. With that resolve, he stepped forward. His mind and body moved in perfect harmony, instinctively mirroring the instructor's earlier movements. Pole by pole, he advanced, each step more fluid than the last. His speed began to build, not from force, but from refinement, as his body adapted and adjusted with every motion. His breathing remained calm and rhythmic as he moved, steady, focused. But then, without warning, a wooden arrow shot out from the side. The moment shattered his composure. A flicker of panic surged through him. Rationally, he knew the arrow wouldn't harm him, not with his current physique. But fear wasn't always rational. In truth, he had never been shot at before. In his past life, he had been just an ordinary person, someone who had never even been in a fight, let alone faced an arrow flying at him. His mind swirled with instinct and memory, yet his body moved on its own, mirroring the motion he had seen from the instructor just moments before. His shoulder twisted fluidly, his body following in perfect synchrony. With a seamless step onto the next pole, he evaded the arrow effortlessly, as though he had done it 100 times before. A smile tugged at his lips. He couldn't deny it. He was enjoying this. The wind whipped against his skin, cool and alive, and every movement felt effortless. There was a liberating rhythm to it all. He had never felt so free. It was as if the world itself bent around his motion, responding to his intent. Such grace, such speed, these movements had no place in his former world. Even if they existed, no one there could perform them with this level of precision. More arrows flashed from the sides and above, but Asher remained unshaken. That first arrow had been a turning point. After dodging it, something within him had clicked. Now he simply moved. Each step flowed into the next, fluid and controlled, his balance perfect. He heard the wind split behind him, a sharp whistle that only meant one thing. Something was coming. Within seconds, a wooden beam entered his omniperception range, 5 meters. Asher didn't hesitate. Without a moment's pause, he backflipped, his body arcing through the air with practiced grace. His purple eyes tracked the beam as it swept beneath him, the world slowing for just a breath. Then, as if the moment were made for him, he descended, landing lightly atop the moving beam. Using it as a foothold, he propelled himself forward, his movements swift and spectral. A grin spread across his face. He moved like a ghost, untouched, untraceable, and within moments, he was already at the far end of the structure. Asher came to a halt, his expression blank, but beneath the stillness, a quiet awe stirred. He was savoring the sensation, the fluidity of his movements, and the startling ease with which he had accomplished it all. That was fun, he murmured under his breath, a trace of wonder in his voice. He had never experienced anything like that. A sudden voice broke the moment. "Have you done this before?" came the calm, yet curious tone of the female instructor behind him. Asher turned, his purple eyes meeting hers. "I haven't," he replied simply. The instructor already knew the answer. No training facilities were ever allocated to the suns and moons before their awakening. Until then, they were left to strengthen their bodies alone, using whatever crude means they could find. No assistance, no resources, no guidance. And yet, the ease with which Asher had moved had compelled her to ask. It wasn't something someone who just awakened could, or should, be capable of. Not without prior experience, not without training. There was a calm certainty in his movements, a fluid confidence that spoke of something deeper, something unnatural. But she could also tell that Asher had mirrored her own movement. It seems the 10th son is indeed a genius, the instructor said with a faint smile, a hint of intrigue in her eyes. It seems I am, Asher replied, the smile returning to his face. He had no intention of wearing a constant mask of indifference or acting distant, as if he were above everyone else. Accepting that he was Asher didn't mean he had to become someone he wasn't. He was still himself, and he would live, speak, and move in a way that reflected exactly that. Seeing a son smile is indeed strange, the instructor mused silently. Among the children of the pre-march, only the first son had ever been known to smile. The rest carried expressions that ranged from cold to utterly unreadable, never warmth, never lightness. Let's raise the tempo and the difficulty then, she said aloud, her voice calm, but laced with challenge. And in the next instant, she vanished. Asher gave a small nod and stepped forward once more, re-entering the structure without hesitation. Each attempt grew more intense. The difficulty scaled rapidly, forcing him to adapt in real time. Poles destabilized in quick succession, sometimes more than two at once, while a barrage of arrows threatened to knock him down. But Asher didn't falter. He didn't overthink, he simply moved. With every stride, his body responded with instinctual precision, turning into a blur of motion as the instructor continued to escalate the trial. Time slipped by unnoticed. When the movement training finally came to an end, Asher stood tall. Though he had danced through the chaos with uncanny grace, sweat clung to his skin, proof of the physical toll. At times, up to 10 poles had collapsed beneath him simultaneously, forcing him to land sideways or rebound midair. And yet, through it all, he hadn't fallen once. After completing the movement and balance training, Asher trailed behind the other trainees. Unfamiliar with the layout of the first training ground, he had no choice but to follow their lead throughout the day. They passed through several doors before arriving at a chamber. Though it opened up into a new space, it was noticeably smaller than the expansive areas designated for physical conditioning and movement training. Asher's gaze drifted upward and froze. A man stood effortlessly on the ceiling, upside down, a book resting casually in his hand. As if sensing the weight of Asher's stare, the man's eyes lifted from the pages and met his. How was he standing like that? Asher wondered, his thoughts swirling with various possibilities. The man snapped the book shut with a quiet thud, then stepped off the ceiling. He descended gracefully, landing as if gravity itself bent to his will. Without preamble, he began to speak. The purpose of this training is singular, to enhance your control over Astra. Nothing more. I will teach only the fundamentals. The rest you will discover on the journey that is your life. He paused briefly, letting his words settle, then continued. Now, as is customary, begin by attempting to form a small sphere with your Astra. Those of you who have already mastered this should focus your efforts on learning to walk on walls or any other surface using Astra alone. At his command, the trainees dispersed into groups. Some remained standing, concentrating intently as they channeled Astra above their palms, attempting to form a small, stable sphere. Others moved toward the walls, channeling Astra into their feet as they began to ascend, each step a test of balance and focus. The man turned to Asher, his gaze calm yet expectant. Since you're new, he said, begin with the Astra sphere. Asher gave a silent nod to the instructor, then raised his hand, focusing inward. He felt the Astra stir within him, flowing through his veins before surging just above his palm. Though invisible to the naked eye, Astra could be sensed, its presence tangible like pressure in the air. He focused, shaping it with intent. But it was unstable. Each time he managed to mold it into the semblance of a sphere, it unraveled the next moment, dissolving into nothing. Still, he could feel something shifting, subtle adjustments, his control refining in real time. With every failed attempt, he improved. Minute by minute, his control sharpened. And after 3 steady minutes, the energy above his palm solidified, delicate, precise. A perfect astrosphere floated in place, stable and balanced. The instructor's gaze shifted to Asher, his eyes narrowing slightly in appraisal. You've managed to form it, he said, voice calm but firm. Now do it again, faster this time. Repeat it until it becomes effortless, until you no longer have to think. With that, he turned his attention to the other trainees, offering no further words. Asher could feel their eyes on him, curious, perhaps envious. It was hard to ignore. In just 3 minutes, he had accomplished something many of them still struggled to master. The astrosphere above his palm dissipated into the air, fading without a sound. Without hesitation, Asher channeled Astro once more, guiding it through his veins and into his palm. This time the sphere formed instantly, clean, stable. He raised his other hand, channeling the same invisible force through his body, and a second astrosphere materialized just as swiftly. Too easy, Asher thought, eyes fixed on the spheres floating above his hands. With a thought, he dispelled them both and repeated the process. Again and again. And with each cycle, his control sharpened. He began to notice the subtle inefficiencies, tiny traces of Astra leaking into the air during formation. Gradually, instinctively, he refined his technique, minimizing the loss and maximizing precision. The process, once fragile and uncontrolled, was quickly becoming second nature. Asher's gaze shifted toward the trainees attempting to scale the walls. Some managed a few steps before slipping, landing awkwardly on the ground. Others couldn't even lift themselves off the floor, their feet trembling with effort as they tried, and failed to channel Astra properly. His eyes then moved to the instructor. Unlike the struggling students, the man stood effortlessly on the vertical surface, as if gravity had no claim on him. Asher's mind began to turn, analyzing every subtle movement. He watched closely the posture, the calm breath, the way the instructor channeled Astra down through his legs, concentrating it into his feet to maintain contact and balance. Sensing the weight of Asher's gaze, the instructor turned his head. His eyes landed on the two astrospheres hovering steadily above Asher's palms, stable, refined, and flawlessly formed. There was no flicker of surprise in the instructor's expression. Forming an astroball was, after all, the most fundamental of fundamentals. Geniuses often required an hour or two to perfect it. True prodigies, monsters, needed only minutes. He had trained suns and moons before, individuals of extraordinary talent, and they, too, had achieved this feat in mere minutes. Asher had simply done it faster. That alone wasn't enough to surprise him. Not yet. You may begin climbing the wall, the instructor said, his tone composed and unhurried. Asher responded with a simple nod, stepping forward with steady, confident strides. Astra surged through him, flowing to the soles of his feet. He adjusted it with careful precision, replicating the method he had observed from the instructor moments earlier. Then, without hesitation, he placed one foot against the wall. His body lifted effortlessly as his second foot followed, locking smoothly into place. For a brief moment, Asher stood still, completely vertical, his body aligned with the wall as though gravity itself had shifted to accommodate him. A small smile curved his lips. Then he began to walk, step after step, smooth and unbroken, as if he were strolling across flat ground. He moved past several trainees who wobbled, slipped, or clung tightly for balance, each struggling to maintain their footing where he now moved with ease. All eyes turned to Asher, stunned into silence as he strode past the instructor himself, still walking upright along the wall with perfect balance, as if defying gravity was as natural as breathing. How? The question echoed through every trainee's mind like a thunderclap. None of them could comprehend it. Walking on walls was supposed to be difficult, an advanced feat requiring both instruction and intense focus. The instructor hadn't even explained the technique to Asher, yet here he was, moving with casual ease, untouched by hesitation or strain. What unsettled them even more was the speed. Forming the astroball had taken him 3 minutes, an already remarkable feat, but this? He had accomplished it in seconds. No misstep, no falter, just effortless mastery. What the others didn't realize was that the reason Asher had taken 3 minutes to form the astroball was simply because he had done it without guidance. He had figured it out on his own. Had he seen someone perform it just once, he would have replicated it instantly. That was the kind of talent he possessed. His ease in climbing the wall was no different. He had observed the instructor's subtle control over Astra, how it was concentrated, directed, balanced. That single glance had been more than enough. But Asher wasn't the only one blessed with exceptional talent. Above, 3 trainees stood upside down on the ceiling, arms folded across their chests, silently observing the scene below. There was no struggle in their stance, no effort in their posture, only quiet composure and superiority. Asher had noticed them from the very beginning during the physical fitness training, where their physiques were clearly above average. During the movement and balance drills, they had moved with precision, struck by fewer arrows than anyone else. Now, even in Astra control, they maintained that same quiet dominance. Hours passed as the other trainees continued their relentless efforts, honing their control with unwavering focus. As the session neared its end and the group prepared to disperse, Asher dropped down from the ceiling, his body descending in freefall before twisting midair and landing with flawless precision on his feet. Weren't those who awakened on the third try supposed to be hopeless? The instructor mused, silently watching Asher blend in with the departing crowd. You can stop sneaking around now, the instructor said calmly, his gaze never shifting. In response, 2 figures emerged beside him, Harold and the female instructor. What are you doing here? Asked Virek, the Astra control instructor, turning toward the pair with a raised brow. I came to see how the 10th son would fare, Eloan replied, her tone light. He breezed through my movement training like it was child's play. Yeah, Harold added, folding his arms. And now he's waltzing through Astra training the same way. We're heading to the next training ground, Eloan said with a small, teasing smile. You coming, or are you going to stay behind and keep reading your erotic novels? Virek sighed. Fine, let's go. I'm curious myself. With that, the trio vanished from sight. Asher walked calmly behind the rest of the trainees, his thoughts drifting. 2 more sessions, and I'll be done for the day. Technically, it's only 1 because I won't be allowed to join the second until next month. The 2 upcoming trainings were weapons practice and monster subjugation. The Wargrave family traditionally introduced their sons, moons, and the other trainees to beast killing a full month after their awakening. That initial month, however, was strictly reserved for weapons training and sparring. During this period, the suns and moons were expected to become familiar with their weapons and test their mettle against each other in preparation for their first real battle. Asher, having only just awakened, was no exception. He would be given 1 month to master the fundamentals of his weapon before he was permitted to face a living threat. As Asher stepped into the new training ground, he was greeted by a vast, open space, larger even than the area designated for physical fitness training. At the center of the field sat a man in a lotus position, eyes closed, his presence radiating calm authority. He appeared to be meditating, undisturbed by the arrival of the trainees. But the moment he sensed their presence, he rose smoothly to his feet and spoke in a clear voice, "Form up and begin your swings." The trainees moved without hesitation. Each of them made their way to the weapon racks lining the sides of the field, selected a weapon, assumed a stance, and began their practice swings with focused determination. The weapon instructor, Clinton, turned to Asher and addressed him in a firm tone. "Since you're new here, take position over there. Your task is 1,000 slashes and thrusts, considering you wield a unique rapier." Asher wasn't the least bit surprised that Clinton knew about his weapon. He assumed the pre-march had already informed Zarek, who had likely passed the information along to the instructors overseeing the first training ground. With a silent nod, Asher walked toward the area Clinton had indicated. As he raised his hand, Virilis materialized in his palm, its blade humming softly with a faint resonance, eager, almost sentient, as if it shared Asher's anticipation for its first true use. "Excited, huh?" Asher mused. Then Asher closed his eyes. He inhaled slowly, deeply, then exhaled, steadying his breath. Entering a modest stance, He raised Virilis above his head and brought it down in an awkward downward slash. Almost instinctively, his body adjusted. His footing shifted. His breathing grew more measured. His grip repositioned ever so slightly, and he struck again. Clinton began to approach, intending to correct the boy's form. Newcomers often fumbled their first swings, especially with such a specialized weapon. But as he neared, he paused. With each swing, Asher improved. Subtly at first, but unmistakably. His form refined itself with every motion, his body learning on its own, fluid, disciplined, focused. Asher didn't seem to notice the instructor at all. He was locked in a rhythm, lost in repetition. His arms moved like clockwork, his body a finely tuned instrument executing the same movement again and again. Sweat rolled down his skin, soaking through his clothes. His violet hair clung damply to his forehead as the sun bore down, merciless and bright, but Asher never stopped. Clinton observed in silence for a moment longer before simply turning away. There was no need for interference. Returning to the center of the field, he called over the 3 trainees from earlier. Without delay, he began sparring with them, correcting their stances, testing their reactions, and refining their instincts. It was hands-on instruction, aimed at sharpening both their form and battle sense. Meanwhile, time slipped by. An hour passed, and Asher completed his 1,000 slashes with unbroken focus. Without pause, he transitioned seamlessly into thrusts. His right leg slid forward in perfect harmony with his leading hand, the point of Virilis darting out with precision, then retracting smoothly. Again and again, each motion flowed into the next, as fluid as breath. His body, though drenched in sweat and trembling with fatigue, pulsed with exhilaration. Muscles ached, lungs burned, but Asher wasn't stopping. He moved as if possessed, immersed in a rhythm all his own. No thoughts, no distractions, only the blade, only the motion. His world had narrowed to the edge of Virilis, and in that narrow space he found clarity. Another hour passed, and still Asher did not pause, not for rest, not even for breath. His movements remained steady and composed. Then at last he halted, mid-thrust, the final motion of his 1,000th thrust complete. He stood there in silence, chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm, sweat dripping from his chin to join the pool forming at his feet. The air around him shimmered faintly with heat and effort. But instead of resting, he moved. Dropping once more into a stance, Asher surged forward, his mind and body synchronizing perfectly. Slash flowed into thrust. Thrust gave way to slash. The 2 motions, once distinct, now blended seamlessly into one fluid dance. His waist twisted, adjusting his center of gravity. Shoulders rolled, arms and legs moved in perfect harmony. Muscle memory from the movement training sparked to life in his mind, guiding his limbs with refined instinct. He wasn't just swinging, he was weaving. Slash, thrust, step, flow. Each element became part of a greater whole. Minutes passed before he finally stopped. His entire form was drenched, steam rising faintly from his body. He stood still, blade lowered, breath deep and even. Then, slowly, a smile crept onto his lips. So this is why everyone wants to reincarnate, he thought, amusement and exhilaration mixing in his gaze. Then he turned and met Clinton's gaze. The instructor stood frozen, eyes wide in disbelief. Around the field, the other trainees had stopped their swings, their attention locked on Asher. Some more expressions of awe, others confusion, and a few fear. To them, he no longer looked like a peer, but something else entirely. A monster in human form. But Asher didn't care. He had no intention of hiding his ability, simply to match the expectations set for those who awakened on their 3rd try. Let them stare. Let them talk. It didn't matter. No one could question him. He was the last heir of a duke, the 10th son of the Wargrave family. With quiet calmness, Asher sat down on the ground, crossing his legs as his breathing slowed. He closed his eyes, shutting out the noise around him, and allowed his mind to replay everything he had experienced throughout the trainings, each movement, each sensation, each moment of growth. Zarek walked with composed grace in a direction all within the estate recognized without question. A calm, knowing smile curved his lips as he passed, and the maids and fellow butlers offered respectful greetings. After all, he was no ordinary servant. He was the personal butler of the Primarch. Before him stood a black door. Without a word or gesture, it parted on its own, and Zarek stepped inside. Inside, a man stood, golden-eyed, golden-haired, Azarin Wargrave, the Primarch of the Wargrave family. He stood by the window, engaged in an act that no one within the estate would have believed possible in their lifetime. Azarin Wargrave, the esteemed, fearsome Primarch, was smiling as he gazed out into the distance. Anyone who witnessed the scene might have thought they had fallen into an illusion. It would have been easier to convince them that the entire history of Crymora was a fabrication than to believe that Azarin Wargrave was smiling. He was a man whom few, if any, had ever seen smile. As a Wargrave, Azarin was known for bearing either a cold, unreadable expression or none at all. And yet, in that quiet moment, one of the strongest men in the world wore a rare, gentle smile. The reason? His youngest son, Asher Wargrave, the 10th son. Zarek stepping in didn't speak or interrupt. He simply stood in place quietly. With Azarin's unparalleled perception, his senses extended across the entire Wargrave estate. At that moment, his attention was fixed on one person, Asher. The boy sat in a lotus position, eyes closed in deep focus. Azarin had been observing him from the very moment he stepped into the first training ground. He had watched him move through each challenge as though it were second nature, effortless, precise, composed. The astrosphere, which had once taken Azarin himself 5 minutes to form, was completed by Asher in less. Perfecting it had taken Azarin 20 minutes. Asher matched that feat with striking ease. The wall climb, once an hour-long ordeal for Azarin, was scaled in mere moments by his son. Even the movement and balance training, which had taken Azarin 4 days to conquer on the lowest difficulty setting, had been approached by Asher with a grace and instinct that bordered on the unnatural. And now, watching his son not only match, but surpass every benchmark he had once set as a so-called once in a millennium genius, Azarin couldn't help but smile. At last, Azarin spoke, his gaze still fixed on the horizon beyond the window. "What do they bring, Zarek?" "It was an invitation, pre-march," Zarek replied without hesitation. Azarin's expression darkened. "Do these useless nobles have nothing better to do? The Emoviri are stirring unrest. Enemy empires are slipping spies into our borders one after the other, and yet they waste their time sending me invitations to meaningless gatherings." As he spoke, the faint smile that had graced his face vanished without a trace. "But you haven't asked what the invitation is for, pre-march," Zarek said with a faint smile tugging at his lips. He had known Azarin since the moment of his birth. He understood the man in ways few ever could, his temperaments, his rare moments of amusement, his silence that spoke more than words. He knew what Azarin despised: meetings, banquets, ceremonies. Unless it involved war councils, strategies to crush rival empires, or decisive strikes against the Emoviri, such invitations were better left undelivered. If not for Asher's awakening, Azarin wouldn't have bothered returning at all. And yet, he had come, quietly, a week before the event, choosing to observe everything from the shadows. "What is the meeting about, then?" Azarin asked, his tone flat, his expression cold. He had already decided to decline, as he always did. Zarek answered with measured calm. "The royal twins' 17th birthday is a week from today. The Emperor has extended a personal invitation." At those words, the icy edge in Azarin's gaze faded, replaced by a neutral stillness. His features grew unreadable, neither tense nor relaxed, merely still. "The prince and princess," he murmured. "I suppose that is understandable. Are you planning to attend, pre-march?" Zarek asked softly. "You already know the answer to that, Zarek. You've always known me better than my own blood," Azarin replied, his gaze never shifting from the window. Zarek offered no response. He hadn't expected one. Azarin never attended such events. He would, as always, send a representative in his place. Who will be going this time? Zarek asked, already sorting through the names of trusted advisors in his mind, those who had become seasoned delegates at such affairs. We'll decide that later, Azarin said curtly. There's still a few days left to decide. His golden eyes remained fixed on the distance, not on the Empire's politics or its emperor, but on one boy alone, Asher Wargrave. Zarek's eyes followed Azarin's line of sight, settling on the first training ground below. Noting where the Primarch's attention lay, he spoke quietly. You didn't need to frame it as a reward, he said. With your authority, you could have placed him there outright. To anyone else, such words might have seemed bold, insolent even. But between them, it was different. Zarek hadn't overstepped. Their bond ran deeper than rank or titles. It was a trust forged over decades. When Azarin had first summoned Asher to his study, his intention had been clear. He would use his authority to personally reinstate him into the first training ground. He couldn't bear the thought of his own son wasting away in the third, surrounded by mediocrity, especially after multiple failed awakenings. At that rate, who could say how long it would have taken for Asher to make any meaningful progress? But then he saw Asher and noticed his life rank. In that moment, he chose a different path. Instead of invoking raw authority, Azarin used Asher's life rank as justification, framing the transfer as a reward. It was a cleaner move, far more palatable to others, and, in truth, a better strategy than what he had originally planned. I know, Azarin replied simply, the familiar smile returning to his face. But with this, he has earned it on his own. How is the youngest master faring, pre-March? Zarek inquired. Unlike Azarin, he couldn't afford the luxury of spending his days observing Asher's training. His responsibilities were many, duties that rightfully belonged to the pre-March, but which Azarin routinely neglected out of sheer indifference. Unless it involved a blade or concerned his family, it rarely made its way onto Azarin's to-do list. What can I say? He is a wargrave. After all, Azarin said, a faint smile tugging at his lips. And he's inherited his mother's innate gift with a rapier. If only she were here to witness it, to see her long-held wish finally fulfilled. A child of hers wielding her weapon with pride. There is a subtle shift in his voice, something softer, more wistful. Beneath his composed exterior, a deep sense of longing lingered. Lily, Azarin's late wife, had been a master of the rapier. Countless foes, men, monsters, even the dreaded Emoviri, had fallen to the precision of her blade. As the Primarch's consort, she had been formidable in her own right, an indomitable force whose strength had once commanded fear and respect in equal measure. To become the wife of a wargrave Primarch, a bloodline born for the art of war, one had to be extraordinary. But to stand beside Azarin, a man who existed beyond the bounds of conventional standards, she had to be something more, truly exceptional. And Lily was exactly that. A woman so formidable that the Empire itself had dubbed her Lily of the Abyss, a name whispered with both reverence and fear. Her strength was the stuff of legend. Few dared challenge her, and fewer still lived to speak of it. Azarin had fallen for Lily the moment he laid eyes on her. Her striking violet hair, the piercing amethyst of her gaze, the flawless porcelain of her skin, the elegant curve of her waist, even her scent, it was all seared into his memory from that first encounter. But at the time, he had not yet ascended to the title of Primarch, and love was a luxury far removed from his path. Lily had loved him as well, yet she, too, understood the unbreakable traditions of the Wargrave bloodline. Bound by duty and restraint, she made no move, knowing full well that desire alone was never enough to overcome the weight of legacy. After Azarin rose to the rank of Primarch, the distance between them began to fade. They grew close, then closer, until at last he proposed. But Lily of the Abyss, forged in battle and unbending in spirit, was not a woman to simply yield to any man, wargrave or not. Instead, she made a counter-proposal of her own. They would fight. If Azarin emerged victorious, she would accept his proposal and become his wife. But if he lost, then he would be her wife. He would cook, clean, and serve her as dutifully as any traditional bride. And above all, he would obey her, just as a wife was expected to obey her husband. Azarin had been momentarily stunned by her response. The notion of cooking or performing domestic duties was almost absurd to a wargrave. Members of his family were warriors, not homemakers. Their days were spent in training, not in kitchens. They had chefs, servants, entire staffs dedicated to the mundane, so they could focus solely on the art of war. There was, in truth, nothing else he had envisioned but the two of them simply being together. But he was a wargrave, a man forged by combat, blood, and unyielding pride. And if battle was the price for love, then he would gladly pay it, especially when the battlefield was shared with someone as unrelenting and wild-hearted as Lily, a woman as much in love with the clash of steel as he was. The duel was nothing short of legendary. Trenches tore through the land. Mountains were reduced to rubble. The earth split beneath their feet, and the land itself shattered beneath the weight of their blows. It was not just a fight, it was a courtship written in scars and fury. For Azarin, the battle was the proposal. And for Lily, her defeat was her answer. Yes. Even on the night of their wedding, Azarin and Lily did not share a traditional union. Rather than consummating their marriage, the two battle-hardened souls spent the night crossing blades beneath the stars, an exchange of strikes instead of vows, steel instead of silk, battlefield instead of bed. It was the only kind of intimacy they truly understood. And yet, for all her strength, for all the legends whispered in her name, Lily of the Abyss met her end not on the battlefield, but in childbirth. It was a fate so cruel, so absurd, that many refused to believe it. But reality does not bend for even the strongest of warriors. Before her passing, Lily had only one wish, that at least one of her children would awaken to the rapier, her cherished weapon, her legacy. That wish had come true, but she was no longer here to witness it, to enjoy it, to nurture it, to pass on the art she had once danced with in war. She had died with Asher cradled in her arms, her final breath spent entrusting their son to Azarin. It was not a request. It was her last will, the final command of a warrior who had never bowed to anything but love. And Azarin, bound by her memory, intended to honor that vow to its fullest, no matter what it demanded of him, until the day he, too, returned to the earth. To Lily, as for the whispers of Asher's banishment, Azarin had never once considered such a thing. He had heard the rumors, yes, but he had not silenced them. Not out of neglect, but conviction. Asher may have been entrusted to him by Lily, but he was still a wargrave by blood. And wargraves do not falter. Azarin held no doubt. His son would awaken, if not on his first or second attempt, then surely on the third. It was not faith. It was certainty. This was the kind of man Azarin Wargrave was: direct, battle-hardened, loving, and disarmingly simple. A man who found clarity in combat, spoke with purpose, and loved with unshakable devotion. Yet few truly knew this side of him. Together with Lily, Azarin had raised their firstborn son, Malric Wargrave, with immense love and care. He was their first child, their pride, and he had received the very best of them both. Perhaps a little too much. Unlike the typical Wargrave, known for their stoic expressions and iron restraint, Malric could hardly maintain a straight face. He smiled often, laughed easily, and wore his emotions openly, an almost heretical trait within his lineage. But there was a reason for it. Malric had grown up bathed in affection, taught to love fiercely and protect even more fiercely. And he had done just that. From a young age, he was raised to shield his siblings, to be their sword and shield, and he embraced the role with a terrifying earnestness. There were whispers of how many lives he'd taken merely for casting the wrong glance at his sisters, and none dared question if the rumors were true. Malric had never believed Asher would be exiled. It was simply impossible, as he knew the real pre-march behind the mask. Sensing the mood had shifted somewhat, Azarin shifted the conversation without missing a beat. With a familiar glint in his eye, He launched into a cascade of boasts about Asher, his talent, his rapid progress, the feats he had already achieved. He even went so far as to brag about Asher's ability to suppress his life rank aura, speaking as though Zarek hadn't been standing right there when it happened. But Zarek said nothing. He simply listened, as he always did. Azarin never shared these fatherly praises with the other ducal families. He reserved them for Zarek alone. And while the Primarch might have believed he was being subtle, Zarek knew the truth. These moments were less about pride and more about love. Asher sat in the lotus position, his posture composed and calm, while the clash of steel rang sharply in the air around him. Yet, the metallic symphony failed to disturb his focus. In the Wargrave ducal family, trainees were never coddled with wooden replicas. From the very outset, they were expected to wield authentic weapons, steel, sharpened, and unrestrained. The risk of injury was not a concern. People with exceptional healing abilities were always on hand to mend flesh and bone. Mastery, after all, demanded real consequences. The trainees no longer spared glances in Asher's direction. This time was meant for training, not idle admiration. Inspired, perhaps even pressured, by Asher's earlier display, Clinton had driven them to their absolute limits. Seated in perfect stillness, Asher finally stirred. His eyelids fluttered open, revealing deep violet eyes that calmly took in the world around him. The very moment his gaze returned to the present, Clinton's voice rang out. Training will resume tomorrow. With that simple command, the session came to an end. One by one, the trainees moved and began filing out of the open courtyard. Fatigue hung heavy in their steps. The sun had already begun its descent, casting long shadows across the first training ground. It was evening, and darkness crept steadily over the horizon. Asher walked ahead of the group, his pace unhurried yet assured. He had already familiarized himself with the layout of the first training ground. There was no need to follow behind like the others. Up ahead, the trio of top-ranked trainees moved with the quiet confidence befitting their skill. Upon noticing Asher's approach, they halted at once and offered a respectful greeting. "Good evening, 10th Sunday." Their words served as a sudden reminder. The rest of the trainees, worn and distracted from training, had neglected the customary courtesy. But now that the session was over, formality could not be ignored, especially not with someone of Asher's status. The thought alone was enough to stir anxiety. After all, who could say what might happen if the 10th Son deemed their disrespect intentional? Without delay, every trainee bowed in unison. "Good evening, 10th Son," they echoed respectfully, voices tinged with both reverence and apprehension. Asher stood momentarily frozen, uncertain of how to respond. The collective greeting, formal and synchronized, left him mildly unsettled. He couldn't imagine enduring this routine every single day just for stepping onto the training grounds. With a faint smile tugging at his lips, he spoke calmly. "From now on, within the training grounds, there's no need for formal greetings. Just head to your destinations and freshen up." And with that, he turned and walked away, leaving the trainees stunned in his wake. No one had expected a response, certainly not a gentle one. They had anticipated silence, perhaps even a cold glance, but a reply. And a smile? It was almost surreal. Was the world ending? Asher, however, paid no mind to their bewilderment. He had no desire to wear a mask of superiority every waking moment. Politeness didn't need to be wrapped in intimidation. If he had to wear a facade, he'd only do so when absolutely necessary. As Asher walked, a subtle sensation coursed through his body, faint, almost imperceptible, yet undeniably present. It wasn't a dramatic surge of power, but a quiet affirmation that he had grown stronger. That slight, minuscule shift was enough. It was proof that his efforts during the rigorous training were bearing fruit. With the other trainees trailing behind, Asher stepped out of the first training ground, his stride steady and composed. Though fatigue clung to his muscles, his body did not falter. He regulated his breathing with practiced ease, smoothing away the weariness that threatened to surface. Without warning, Lyra appeared behind Asher like a phantom emerging from shadow, silent, graceful, and sudden. Lyra, it's been a while, Asher said, without turning or pausing his steps. It seems training went well. Young master, she replied with a faint smile. Though she was barred from entering the first training ground, her senses had easily pierced the boundary. She had shadowed Asher's presence from beginning to end, and she knew, of course, that he had concealed his life rank. I'd say it was fun, Asher replied calmly, his smile returning as he felt exhilarated after everything that happened. By the time Asher returned to his room, the sun had already dipped below the horizon. Without delay, he made his way to the shower. He could clearly smell the sweat clinging to his skin. The grime of effort needed to be washed away. After cleaning up, he changed into a fresh set of clothes from his wardrobe and settled into a chair, waiting for dinner. Lyra had already moved to fetch it. The urge to open his system panel tugged at him, but he decided to wait. He preferred to finish everything involving Lyra first. Moments later, she returned, carrying a tray with dinner. Asher wasted no time. He began eating immediately. After hours of intense training, his hunger had grown into a silent beast gnawing at him from within. Between bites, he glanced at Lyra and asked, Lyra, do you know why the Wargrave family doesn't offer structured training in elemental manipulation the way they do with Astra? Lyra, standing silently behind him, responded without hesitation. Young master, while the ducal family provides instruction, it does not teach everything. Its purpose is to offer a foundation. After that, it's up to the individual to build upon it in the way they see fit. The difference in this case is that the family has chosen not to offer a formal foundation for elemental manipulation. This is because the control gained from Astra manipulation can, with understanding, be adapted to govern elemental energy as well. Asher absorbed her words in thoughtful silence. He had anticipated structured lessons in elemental control, yet none had come. Not even Boris had spoken of it. So I'm expected to learn it on my own, he said quietly. Yes, young master, Lyra replied calmly. Though you may seek guidance from others from time to time, most individuals train their elemental affinities independently. There isn't much complexity involved. With a bit of intellect and talent, even those with little natural gift can make measurable progress. Asher gave a slight nod. He understood well that Crimora was unlike other worlds in the novels he read. Worlds where mages delved deep into arcane studies, deciphering complex runes, memorizing incantations, and mastering the intricate theories behind spell casting and elemental control. None of that applied here. In Crimora, elemental manipulation required neither profound intellect nor intense academic rigor. It was more instinctual, a craft honed through practice, not study, or with a bit of study. A short while later, he finished his meal, setting the utensils aside, just as Lyra re-entered. She gathered the empty plates with practiced efficiency. Good night, young master, she said softly before slipping out of the room. The time was already 8:30 p.m. Training ran from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. each day, and the routine left little space for leisure. Asher leaned back slightly, his eyes drifting toward the ceiling as thoughts filled his mind. With the absolute physique, I doubt I'll need a full 8 hours of sleep. 5, maybe even less, might be enough to restore me to peak condition. Still, I'll have to test it. Tonight's sleep would be the test. There was simply too much to do. 12 hours of daily training in the first training ground, followed by personal regimens that included elemental control, rapier mastery, and cultivation. It was a relentless cycle of effort with barely any time to rest, an unbreaking pace carved into every day. So this is why children from powerful families often begin with modest life ranks. It's not negligence, it's deliberate. Their early years are spent building a solid foundation. After all, a high life rank without the substance to support it is meaningless. No matter the world, strength without depth is shallow and easily shattered. Asher, time to see if there are any changes to my stats, since I feel subtly stronger, Asher thought with a smile. Status, Asher commanded. Name, Asher Wargrave. Age, 17. Bloodline, the Wargrave lineage. Physique, absolute physique. Titles, youngest heir, 10th Son, Disgrace of the Wargrave. Unique Body Holder. Life Rank, Faint Star. Sublife Rank, Flare. Affinity, Lightning. Strength, 57-58. Agility, 57-59. Vitality, 58. Perception, 52-60. Asher's eyes swept across the changes, analyzing each with growing interest. His strength had risen by a single point, expected, given his recent physical exertion. Agility, however, had improved by 2, a direct result of his intensive movement and balance training. Vitality hasn't increased, which was understandable. What truly stunned Asher, however, was his perception stat. It hadn't just improved, it had soared, leaping from the lowest stat to the highest in a single bound, now standing at an impressive 60 points. He could feel the difference. His senses had sharpened considerably, and his omni-perception now extended to a 6-meter radius. Looks like having arrows constantly fired at me actually paid off, he mused wryly. Asher smiled. In just a few hours of training, his progress had been remarkable. His thoughts drifted to his absolute physique, the ability limitless physical growth, an ability that allowed his body to grow endlessly through combat and training. Even without formal cultivation, as long as he pushed himself to the edge, whether through battle or relentless drills, he would shatter that edge and grow stronger in response. Truly broken. But Asher understood the truth behind it. While the concept seemed straightforward, the reality was far more brutal. The stronger one became, the more punishing it was to break past the next threshold. Each new limit was a wall steeper than the last. But that was a concern for another time. Why waste thought on hurdles that weren't yet in his path? Asher immediately settled onto his bed in a lotus position, his eyes closing with practiced ease. Without delay, he began cultivating. Streams of astra in the air stirred, flowing through his pores and coursing directly into his astra veins with rhythmic precision. Just because the first training ground didn't officially allocate time for cultivation didn't mean he would neglect it. He would carve out his own path, even in silence. Hours slipped by unnoticed, and soon it was already 1 a.m. System, is it possible for you to tell me the time? Asher asked as he opened his eyes. Throughout his cultivation, he had opened his eyes several times, checking the clock intermittently. He had set a strict boundary. Cultivation would end at 1 a.m., at which point he would shift into the next phase of his training. The system remained silent. Whether it was genuinely speechless at Asher's attempt to turn it into an alarm clock, or simply unwilling to respond, he couldn't tell. Just as he was about to rise from his bed, the familiar chime finally echoed in his mind, like the reluctant sigh of an overworked assistant pushed into unpaid overtime. Ding! It is possible, host. Asher glanced at the message, a smile tugging at his lips. He gave a small nod of acknowledgement. I'm about to begin my lightning training. It'll only last an hour. End time is 2 a.m. sharp. Notify me. After a short pause, the system responded. Affirmative, host. Asher stared at the ellipses preceding the message, brows twitching slightly. This lazy system, he muttered with a shake of his head. No time to waste. Climbing down from his bed, Asher raised his hand, and crackling lightning surged to life around his fingers. With a focused breath, he willed the energy to flow downward, guiding it from his fingertips to his palm. The lightning arcs brightened, pulsing with a vibrant, sharpened hue as they followed his intent. Drawing upon the fundamentals of his Astra control training, Asher attempted to compress the energy into a sphere, a lightning ball. Within seconds, the orb began to take shape, humming softly with unstable power. He didn't pause to celebrate the minor success. Compared to the vast array of overwhelming abilities he had read about or witnessed, a mere lightning ball felt almost laughable. Without hesitation, he moved on, trying to refine its form. He focused on condensing the sphere, willing it to solidify, then experimented with its size, enlarging it, then shrinking it, only to expand it again. Then suddenly, boom, the unstable lightning ball detonated in front of his face, sending a mild shockwave that instantly blasted his hair upward, transforming it into a wildly spiked mess. In a flash, Virilis materialized beside him, as if asking what was wrong with his control. There's still progress to be made, Asher mused, his eyes narrowing with determination. He didn't relent. Instead, he pressed on, continuing his training with sharp focus. Harnessing his control, Asher began shaping the lightning into rudimentary forms, spheres, lines, crude edges, though most wavered with instability. Still, within mere minutes, the raw potential began to settle. The shapes grew more defined, less volatile. His rapid improvement was undeniable, a testament to both his talent and tenacity. I wonder how long it took others to reach this point, he pondered briefly. But the thought was fleeting. No matter. That has nothing to do with me. System, how much time remains? I've already completed the basics, and it still hasn't been an hour. 10 minutes left, host. Since I've wrapped up the fundamentals of lightning control, let's test something else. With purpose in his step, Asher turned and made his way toward the bathroom. He had long since set his sights on walking on water. If walking on walls is possible, he reasoned, then why not water? The instructor may not have taught it, but that didn't mean it was impossible or that Asher couldn't be the first to do it. With that thought, he filled a wide, tub-like structure to the brim. Channeling Astra into his feet, he took a deliberate step toward the water's surface, only for his foot to plunge straight to the bottom. Just as I suspected, he thought calmly, unbothered. The Astra control method for walking on walls clearly didn't translate to water, and he had intentionally used the same approach to confirm his theory. A slow smile curved his lips as he withdrew his foot. The Astra beneath him shifted under his thought and control. With this new method, he took another step. This time, his foot landed atop the water's surface, steady and undisturbed, not even a ripple. Rising slightly, he placed his other foot beside the first. It too held firm. The smile on his face widened into a grin. How many movie superheroes from my previous life could even dream of doing this? His first failure had sparked a revelation. Walls were solid, water was liquid, their properties opposites. So why not reverse the control method as well? It had worked perfectly. Host, it's time. The system's notification echoed in his mind. Still grinning, Asher stepped off the water and made his way back to bed. Whether he would actually sleep, with excitement surging through every fiber of his being, was another matter entirely. 3 days had passed since Asher's initial arrival at the first training ground. In that brief span, much of the training had begun to feel mundane to him, as he navigated its challenges with increasing ease. But Harold remained undeterred. Regardless of Asher's rapid progress, he offered no praise, no pause for recognition, as though such improvement was merely the baseline of expectation. Instead, he escalated the intensity of the training to match Asher's growth, and Asher embraced every moment of it. During movement training, Asher chose to challenge himself by closing his eyes. Given that his omniperception remained active even without visual input, he saw it as an opportunity to refine its use. Within a 6-meter radius, everything fell clearly within his perception. Beyond that, a veil of complete darkness prevailed. It was during this exercise that Asher came to a realization. While omniperception heightened his awareness and granted a seamless 360-degree view of his surroundings, it did not equate to true sight, particularly not when it came to perceiving the invisible. But that didn't matter to Asher. He pushed his senses to their very limits. If he couldn't perceive the invisible directly, then he would learn to read the subtle shifts in the air, the breeze parting as something moved through it. With that thought, Asher no longer wished to see the arrows flying toward him. No, he wanted to trace their trajectories using only the wind and sound. At first, he was struck repeatedly, but gradually he adapted. His body began to respond instinctively, his ears attuned to the slightest whistle, and his skin detected even the faintest disturbances in the air. From clumsy beginnings, he progressed steadily, fluidly, until within 30 minutes his movements became flawless. The trainees, along with Aloan, who had believed they had already seen the extent of his abilities, were once again left speechless. During the Astra control training, Asher demonstrated his ability to walk on water before Virek. Impressed, Virek informed him that water walking happened to be the next phase of their training. The other 3 gifted trainees had also mastered the basic technique. However, Virek raised the difficulty, transforming the calm surface into surging waves, destabilizing the water beneath their feet and making balance far more difficult. But Asher adapted effortlessly. He had already anticipated such a scenario and trained for it by himself before Virek even suggested it. As for wall climbing, Asher was tasked with scaling unstable, uneven surfaces, walls that were anything but smooth. The purpose was clear: to sharpen his control and force his body to adapt reflexively, without the need for conscious correction. Within just 3 days, Asher had shown remarkable progress across every aspect of his training. Over the past 3 days, Asher had grown somewhat closer to the trainees. He never demanded formal greetings. He simply gave a subtle nod in their direction whenever he arrived. To their surprise, Asher turned out to be far more easygoing than they had expected. He neither looked down on anyone nor spoke with arrogance or coldness. Whenever he had a moment to spare, he would casually offer a piece of advice to a nearby trainee. That said, he wasn't going out his way to help others. Asher wasn't nearly charitable enough to offer free guidance without reason. Within the weapon training grounds, Asher moved with effortless ease. His footwork was flawless, each step flowing seamlessly into the next, and his swings and thrusts naturally adjusted in rhythm with his shifting stance. Unlike his first day at the first training ground, when he simply relied on movements from his prior training, this time, Asher observed the movements of Clinton and the others, analyzing their forms and integrating their nuances into his own style. The result was undeniable. His progress had been nothing short of remarkable. Hearing footsteps behind him, Asher turned to see the instructor, Clinton, approaching with a smile on his face. He had witnessed many trainees over the years, but never had he seen such rapid and profound improvement. To train someone this talented, someone capable of achieving the unimaginable, felt like an honor. "You've been training alone for the past 3 days," Clinton said, his tone light but firm. "It's time for a spar." Asher's eyes swept across the field. The top 3 trainees and several others were noticeably absent. He assumed they had been sent to the monster subjugation training. Many of them had already spent over a month in the first training ground. In a month, Asher reminded himself. Though he looked forward to the challenge, he couldn't ignore the unease lingering beneath his anticipation. His first kill might make him nauseous, he might even vomit. In his previous life, he had been just an ordinary person, someone who hadn't so much as killed a chicken. A few cockroaches and ants, perhaps, but even toddlers did that. "Will I be sparring with you?" Asher asked. Clinton shook his head and replied, "No. You'll be sparring with another trainee. Truthfully, with your level of talent, you should be facing the best we have, but he's currently away at the monster subjugation training." Asher gave a small nod in understanding. Clinton then turned toward a boy sparring at the edge of the field. "Kale, over here." Hearing his name, Kale immediately halted mid-motion. His gaze turned to Clinton, and without hesitation, he responded, "Yes, instructor," before jogging over. Clinton turned to Asher and spoke. "This is Kale. Among those who've been here for less than a month, he's currently the most outstanding. In 2 days, he'll begin his monster subjugation training." Asher gave a slight nod, his gaze shifting to the boy beside him, a fellow 17-year-old with striking red hair and sharp black eyes. "This is just a weapon-focused training session," Clinton began, his voice clear and brisk. "No abilities of any kind are to be used. That includes your rapier skill, 10th Sunday. You'll fight using only your rapier, no astra, no enhancements." He paused briefly, letting the instructions sink in. "Only superficial injuries are permitted. No critical strikes, and absolutely no aiming for vital points." Clinton was thorough, knowing this would be Asher's first official spar. He wanted to ensure all boundaries were set clearly. With that, he stepped aside, allowing Asher and Kale to take their positions, standing face-to-face on the sparring field. "It's nice to meet you, 10th son," Kale said with a polite smile, choosing his words carefully. Nice to meet you too, Asher replied, his tone relaxed yet clear. I hope you're not planning to hold back just because of my family name. This is a training ground, not a political gathering. And don't worry, win or lose, I won't make your life difficult. He spoke not just to reassure, but to dispel any assumptions Kale might hold. Asher knew all too well that many hesitated around the son of the Wargrave family, fearful of offending prestige. Kale's smile lingered, though a brief frown flickered across his face. Then he nodded. Very well. I won't hold back then, 10th Sunday. With that, he dropped into a battle stance, twin daggers steady in his hands, measured, prepared. Asher, in contrast, assumed no stance. He simply inhaled and exhaled, drawing his focus inward, sharpening his senses. This would be his first true spar since reincarnation. Begin, came Clinton's voice from the side. At the sound, Kale lunged forward without hesitation, his dagger slicing through the air in a swift arc aimed directly at Asher's abdomen. Asher hadn't intended to initiate the fight. It was his first real spar, and his strategy was to observe, study his opponent's rhythm before fully engaging. With that in mind, he brought his rapier up to parry. A sharp clang rang out as steel met steel, and a brief cascade of sparks lit up the space between them, marking the beginning of their clash. Kale didn't hesitate. His second dagger shot forward fast, sharp, and unforgiving. He honored Asher's request, holding nothing back. Lowering his stance, Kale drove the blade toward Asher's knees in a fluid, deadly motion. But Asher remained composed. With effortless grace, he flipped forward, soaring above the strike and over Kale, his movement as smooth as flowing water. As Asher flipped overhead, Kale responded in a heartbeat. His waist twisted, shoulders rolling in one seamless motion as both daggers snapped upward, ready to intercept a strike from above. But the attack never came. Asher had only dodged, offering no retaliation. Kale didn't dwell on the reason. His mind stayed sharp, focused. Without pause, he advanced with even greater efficiency. His daggers flashed like twin streaks of silver, one driving toward Asher's shoulder, the other targeting his ribs with ruthless intent. Asher took a single step back, effortlessly slipping past both strikes. But Kale was undeterred, his movements fluid and serpentine, like a viper poised to strike again. Without missing a beat, he flowed into the next assault, his dagger darting toward Asher's wrist, aiming to disarm him of Virilis. A flash of silver answered the threat. Virilis intercepted the blow mid-arc, ringing with a sharp clang. Steel sang against steel. Their eyes locked. Purple met black. No words were exchanged. None were needed. In that silent moment, understanding passed between them. Then, in a heartbeat, they exploded into motion, their figures blurred, vanishing from ordinary sight as speed took over. A storm of movement followed, blades flashing, feet gliding, instincts clashing. The sharp symphony of steel on steel echoed like rolling thunder, marking the rhythm of their escalating duel. Speed met speed. Strength met strength. Metal met metal. The space between them drowned in crimson sparks as their blades clashed and bodies weaved across meters of terrain in fluid motion. Each collision painted the air with flickers of red, fleeting and fierce. Yet, not once did Asher strike back. He wasn't here to win. He was here to learn. With no real battle experience to draw from, he welcomed the attacks, using it as a forge for experience. His battle intuition burned brighter with every step, sharpening with each near miss and shifting strike. His purple eyes flickered with focus, dancing within their sockets as they tracked Kale's every move. Posture, footing, the shift of his shoulders against his hips, nothing escaped Asher's gaze. He analyzed it all with eerie clarity, reading Kale like an open book, absorbing every nuance as if etching it in a muscle memory. And through it all, his body moved, not from training, but from raw instinct, growing with each heartbeat. He's at the Dust Kindle Star life rank. Asher noted as he moved, reading Kale's strength with growing clarity. There was no surprise. Kale had awakened at 15, granting him 2 full years of cultivation training and real combat experience. But to Asher, that gap meant little. His absolute physique was a force unto itself, a gift that defied conventional limits. It bridged the divide that should have existed between them, neutralizing the advantage Kale's rank should have granted. Kale's mind wrestled with the unfolding reality, struggling to comprehend what he was witnessing. It was impossible. No, it was supposed to be impossible. Even for a genius, talent alone couldn't substitute experience. Kale knew that. He was sure Asher knew it too. Otherwise, he wouldn't have made that comment about not making his life difficult if he lost. At this moment, Kale felt as though he were dueling Clinton, their seasoned weapons instructor. The balance in Asher's stance, the subtle angle of his rapier poised for a block, betrayed an unsettling truth. Asher was anticipating his every move before he even completed the motion himself. It was as if Asher was reading the very intent behind his strikes. That level of predictive combat wasn't something a novice should possess. Clinton could do it, yes, but only after decades of hard-earned experience on the battlefield. Driven by his current reality, Kale pushed himself, speed, strength, everything, to the absolute limit. But no matter how much he escalated, Asher matched him seamlessly. Asher never surpassed him, never faltered. He simply mirrored Kale's intensity, maintaining a flawless equilibrium. To Kale, it made no sense. Asher had only awakened 3 days ago. By all logic, he should still be at the Dust Faintstar life rank. He was supposed to be weaker. Even accounting for the Wargrave bloodline's inherent physical superiority, it shouldn't have been enough to disregard an entire major life rank. And yet, here he was, defying expectation, transcending reason. Suddenly, Asher disengaged, fluidly stepping several meters back. His breathing remained steady, his posture loose, muscles relaxed, not a trace of tension in sight. Kale watched, uncertain, as Asher stood still, as though both his mind and body were recalibrating, aligning to some unseen rhythm. So this is the extent of what the current best can offer for now. Asher thought silently. His purple gaze settled on the red-haired boy before him. Then, without flourish or arrogance, he spoke. I will be attacking now. Prepare yourself. Kale couldn't understand why Asher had given him a warning. This was a sparring match, not a duel of honor. Still, his instincts kicked in. His body dipped slightly as he prepared to respond, knees coiled for motion. But he never got the chance. Before his muscles could even fully engage, Asher was already in motion, his figure blurring forward with frightening speed. Virilis, his rapier, moved with flawless synchronicity, carving through the air in a clean downward arc aimed at Kale's shoulder. Kale's footwork shifted reflexively as he moved to intercept the blow, but to his astonishment, the attack never landed where expected. Mid-strike, Asher's blade curved with uncanny twist, altering its trajectory in defiance of momentum. A feint? No, not quite. He readjusted mid-motion. Kale's thoughts raced as he twisted, attempting to intercept the blade now veering toward his flank. But he was a fraction too slow. Asher's rapier sliced cleanly across his side, the cold kiss of steel meeting flesh. The sharp sound of tearing muscle pierced the air, followed by a fine mist of crimson as blood arced outward in a brief, violent bloom. Kale's eyes widened in shock. Pain flared, sharp, immediate, but it didn't stop him. He'd been injured in spars before. This wasn't new. And truthfully, the pain was manageable, almost dull. Kale retaliated instantly, his twin daggers slicing through the air in a fluid, whistling arc. They moved as one, sharp, chilling, deadly. But Asher didn't block. He simply sidestepped, smooth and effortless, as though he'd seen the strike coming from light years away. How is this even possible? Kale's mind screamed, but there was no time for answers. Asher allowed no pause, no room to breathe. Virilis flashed forward again, a silver streak of death. The blade tore cleanly through Kale's thigh, and a spray of blood erupted, staining the ground below. Pain shot up his leg, but before he could even flinch, Asher was already in motion, his form shifting seamlessly as he moved in for the finishing blow. The rapier blurred once more, a whisper of steel slicing through the air, then halted. Its tip hovered just centimeters from Kale's neck. Kale froze. His Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard, black eyes locked onto the unblinking purple gaze that bore down on him with chilling clarity. There was no rage in those eyes, no gloating, just calm detachment, like a judge delivering a verdict. A moment ago, they had stood as equals, balanced toe-to-toe. Now, that illusion was shattered. They were anything but that. Clinton stood off to the side, intending to observe the sparring match from start to finish. He was keen to witness the 10th son's performance firsthand, while remaining prepared to intervene at a moment's notice to prevent either Asher or Kale from sustaining life-threatening injuries. He had never once believed Asher stood a chance. Clinton understood the nature of genius. He had witnessed monsters in human form, and had even been the one to train them. After all, every son and moon of the Wargrave family passed through this very first training ground, beginning at the age of 15 and typically concluding by 17. But this situation was different. 2 years of refined experience against none. Kale was no ordinary trainee. He was a slum-born orphan who had been tempered by hardship, forced to fight and steal from an early age just to survive. His battle instincts were forged in desperation, not drills. Without hesitation, he gave the signal. Begin. Clinton observed Asher intently, tracking every movement with the intention of offering corrections later. He analyzed his footwork, the fluidity of his rapier, and the rhythm of his stance, but found nothing amiss. The 10th son moved with a precision that left little room for critique. There was a distinct light in Asher's eyes, a quiet, calculating gleam. Clinton recognized the strategy. Observe first, adapt later. But as the bout progressed, something shifted. This wasn't mere observation. Asher wasn't simply learning. He was absorbing Kale in his entirety, his patterns, his movement, his very self, until the boy before him was no longer an opponent, but an open book laid bare. Clinton watched in stunned silence as the 10th son raised his rapier to block, before Kale had even launched his attack. He could hardly believe what he was seeing. This was supposed to be a novice, someone who had only awakened 4 days ago, a boy who had never once wielded a weapon. By all logic, he should have faltered. He should have taken hits. He should have been overwhelmed, outmatched, outpaced. He was supposed to struggle. He was supposed to survive, not compete. He was supposed to try and keep up. He was supposed to... Clinton had been briefed by Virek, Eloan, and Harold about Asher's remarkable feats during previous training sessions. Yet, he had never taken the time to witness them for himself. Whether occupied with instructing the other trainees or honing his own skills, he simply hadn't prioritized it. Still, he had believed their reports, if only because of the astonishing swordplay Asher had demonstrated on his very first day. Now, as he watched the boy in motion, that belief solidified into awe. Asher flipped forward, sidestepped once, ducked, parried, blocked, and defended, all with seamless precision. Not a single movement was wasted, as though he had been doing it since the day he was born. But Clinton saw more than just skill. He saw elements within Asher's movements. Echoes of familiar techniques. Echoes of himself. Over the past 3 days in the first training ground, Asher hadn't simply swung his sword mindlessly during weapon drills. No, he had watched, absorbed, and internalized. And now, in the heat of battle, he was applying. Clinton's eyes narrowed as realization struck. He had been so captivated by the elegance of Asher's rapier movement that he'd overlooked the impossible. Asher wasn't supposed to move at this speed. He wasn't supposed to be able to react this quickly. By every measure, strength, speed, reflex, he should have been outclassed. And yet, even as Kale ramped up the intensity of his attacks, Asher matched him step for step, stroke for stroke. What has the Wargrave bloodline brought into the world? Clinton couldn't help but wonder. It seems even the limitations of a third awakening can't restrain the Wargrave bloodline, he thought, just as Asher abruptly shifted from defense to offense. His rapier moved with startling clarity, clean, efficient, and unhesitating. Then came a sudden mid-motion shift in attack. Not a feint, but a deliberate recalibration. Clinton's eyes widened. He had executed that very maneuver just days ago against a trainee. Yet here it was again, replicated flawlessly, not mimicked but mastered. Asher had taken the movement, dissected it, and then seamlessly adapted it mid-combat, adjusting his strike in real time to counter his opponent's defense. Such battle intuition, Clinton mused, eyes narrowed in disbelief. He had heard of individuals capable of evolving mid-combat, those rare fighters who improved with every life-threatening battle. The Primarch himself was said to be one of them, people who baffled stronger opponents by adapting faster than they could overwhelm. But Asher was something else entirely. His battle intuition didn't just rival theirs, it surpassed it by a staggering margin. Even among those gifted with instinctual adaptation, few, if any, could execute what Asher was displaying now. Then it happened. Asher struck first. A thin crimson line opened across Kale's skin. Another flash of movement, and blood bloomed from Kale's thigh. And then silence. The rapier stopped at Kale's neck, just a breath away from slicing clean through. The training ground fell into a frozen stillness, as if even the world itself paused to ask whether it could truly give rise to such a genius. Reality bent, and yet no one dared to accept it. Every trainee had only joined the Wargrave family within the last month. None had yet qualified for the monster subjugation. All were still in preparation. And yes, they were talented, each of them chosen for potential, for promise. But this, 3 days. That was all it had taken. 3 days for Asher to defy every standard, to upend every assumption, to surpass what any of them thought possible. Clinton snapped out of his daze, the sharp sound of his boots striking the floor, breaking the stillness that had gripped the training ground. "Congratulations on your first victory, 10th son," he said with a measured smile as he approached. Asher's violet eyes shifted from Kale to meet Clinton's gaze, calm and sharp. "It's thanks to your teachings, instructor," Asher replied, a faint smile touching his lips. Clinton's lips twitched ever so slightly. "Teachings," he echoed in his mind, almost incredulous. "I haven't taught you a single thing." He had intended to guide Asher over the past 3 days. That was the plan. But each time he observed, he found nothing to correct, nothing out of place. And now, to be credited for something he hadn't done? He truly didn't know what to say. He was left speechless. Kale stood off to the side, stunned, bewildered. His entire sense of pride, the foundation of his identity, lay in ruins before the being known as Asher Wargrave. He had always taken pride in being the strongest among the newcomers, those who had been here for less than a month. His talent had never been in question. Clinton himself had praised him on multiple occasions. From the slums to this very moment, Kale had clung to the strength he'd cultivated with his own hands. He'd wielded a dagger long before his awakening, surviving on sheer instinct and grit. But now he understood all too clearly what had transpired. He hadn't just faced a prodigy. He had helped a monster take his first step. He exhaled softly, pushing aside the remnants of shock and turbulent emotion. Though he had nurtured a measure of pride and confidence in his strength, Kale was not naive enough to believe he stood at the pinnacle of talent in this world. He was well aware that monsters roamed this planet, some even within the very family he served. What he hadn't expected was to encounter one so soon, let alone spar with one. "Good match, Kale. Thank you for this." Asher's calm voice broke through the lingering silence. Kale turned, his black eyes locking onto Asher, who approached with a faint smile and an outstretched hand. After a moment's pause, Kale took it and offered a small nod. "Thank you, 10th Sunday. It seems I'll need to train harder if I hope to keep up with you." Asher didn't reply. He simply nodded once, turned on his heel, and made his way to a quiet corner. There he sat down, eyes closed, lost in his thoughts. This had become a ritual of sorts for him, a moment of stillness after every new milestone. Minutes passed. Soon after, the day's training came to an end. Asher exited the training grounds in silence, with Lyra materializing at his side as if by instinct. Neither exchanged words. There was no need. An unspoken understanding had long been established between them. Lyra knew Asher's routine well. After each session at the first training ground, he would return to his quarters to continue his relentless self-discipline. She never intruded upon his silence, never offered unsolicited counsel. She simply observed, ever present, yet never overstepping her bounds. As for Asher, once he discovered that his body could operate at peak condition with only 4 hours of sleep, he embraced the regimen without hesitation. Those few hours became his sole rest, every remaining moment devoted entirely to training. That night passed in quiet intensity, with Asher honing his mastery over the lightning element before finally allowing himself sleep. Dawn crept in gently, sunlight filtering through the room in golden shafts. Asher rose precisely on time. The first training session began at 7 a.m., and punctuality was non-negotiable. He knew he had to arrive early. Harold had no tolerance for tardiness. From what Asher had observed, even his status as a son might not shield him from punishment. Just as Asher prepared to head out, Lyra stepped into the room and spoke, her tone calm and composed. "Good morning, young master. I've been instructed by Mr. Zarek to inform you that your training plans for today have been canceled. You have other matters to attend to. The instructors at the first training ground have already been notified." Asher paused, momentarily caught off guard. He hadn't even completed a full week of training, and now he was being pulled away? Are they assigning me a personal instructor because of my talent? He wondered. It was the only explanation that made sense to him. But why speculate when he could simply ask? "Do you know what this is about?" Asher inquired, his voice calm but curious. "No, young master," Lyra replied, shaking her head lightly. "I did ask Mr. Zarek, but he offered no details, only that we would be informed in due time." With no answers forthcoming, Asher made a quick decision. As much as he would have preferred to continue training, it seemed wiser to conserve his strength in case the day demanded something more physical. Without another word, he climbed back onto the bed and slipped beneath the duvet. Within moments, he was asleep. Lyra watched in quiet surprise. She had expected him to wait in contemplative silence, not drift off so effortlessly. A faint smile touched her lips. Without disturbing the peace, she stepped out and gently closed the door behind her. Though still early when he first returned to bed, just past 6 a.m., for quiet hours slipped by, and the time now stood at 10. A firm knock at the door roused Asher from his sleep. "Come in," he said, rising from the bed. The door opened, revealing Zarek with Lyra standing silently behind him. "Good morning, 10th Sunday. I trust you rested well." Zarek greeted with a slight bow. "I did," Asher replied evenly. "Now, what's going on?" There was no room for pleasantries. His tone was direct. "You'll be briefed by the Primarch himself," Zarek answered with a faint smile, before turning on his heel and exiting the room. Asher exhaled through his nose, his expression unreadable. Without delay, he moved to follow, falling in step behind Zarek as they made their way to wherever the Primarch awaited. They arrived at a location entirely different from where Asher had last encountered the Primarch. It was unfamiliar, yet grand in a subdued, authoritative way. Without hesitation, Asher stepped forward with calm, composed strides. He felt no fear in the presence of the Primarch. The man's lack of warmth, his cold, unreadable expression, was nothing new. It was, after all, a common trait among his siblings. "I greet the Primarch," Asher said, bowing with formal grace, his right hand placed firmly over his left chest. Seated at the head of the chamber, the Primarch regarded his youngest son with golden eyes, piercing, steady, and unreadable. "It seems you've made quite the progress since our last meeting," Azarin said, his tone devoid of emotion, his expression carved from stone. But deep within, hidden behind his stoic mask, the father in him smiled, a quiet, invisible joy that only a parent could feel upon witnessing the growth of their child after tireless effort and expectation. "As your son, that much is to be expected, Primarch," Asher replied smoothly, though internally he cringed at the formality of it all. "I have a task for you," Azarin said, his tone as flat and composed as ever. Asher remained silent, his posture steady. He knew better than to interrupt. "The Emperor's twins will be celebrating their birthday in 5 days. You are to attend the gathering and represent the Wargrave, Azarin stated plainly. Asher's mind stirred. He was well aware of the Emperor, the sovereign of their vast empire, but he had never met the man, nor anyone from the royal family. And now, he was being dispatched to what would likely be a grand, politically charged event. You will depart today, Azarin continued. The journey to the capital will take 3 days. That will be all. You may leave. No further details were offered. Just like that, the audience was over. Asher gave a curt nod and turned to leave. Lyra, as always, followed silently, her presence a shadow behind him as they made their way back to his quarters. Once inside, Asher sat on the edge of his bed, his thoughts drifting as silence settled around him. His gaze unfocused, fixed somewhere distant. Royal gatherings like this rarely brought anything good. Being a celebration hosted by the Emperor himself, it was all but certain that the other 3 ducal families would be in attendance, alongside a host of nobles spanning every tier of the aristocracy. In Asher's mind, it was a congregation of prideful peacocks, each vying for power and recognition. And yet, there was a part of him that looked forward to it. All his memories, his entire existence thus far, had been confined within the Wargrave estate. As was tradition, no Wargrave was permitted to set foot beyond its borders until they had awakened their powers. Now, with that right fulfilled, Asher was being sent out into the wider world. For the first time, he would see it with his own eyes. And that, despite the pomp and politics of it all, stirred something within him. I suppose it's time to meet a parade of arrogant young masters who believe the world revolves around their titles. Asher muttered under his breath, a faint smirk playing at the corner of his lips. His thoughts shifted again. In scenarios like this, an heir traveling to the capital for a high-profile royal event, the risk of an ambush was more than a possibility. It was almost tradition. I hope they assign enough guards to protect me on the road, he murmured, his tone more practical than fearful. He hadn't suddenly become invincible overnight. There was no cheat or divine shortcut at play. Yes, he was talented, exceptionally so, but talent was only the foundation. Growth required time. He was still at the very beginning of the path, still at the lowest life rank. Despite viewing the event as little more than a gathering of entitled nobility, Asher found himself anticipating it in his own way. He looked forward to witnessing their arrogance firsthand, to hear the boasts of young elites who believed themselves gods in human form. Reading about such characters in books was one thing. Watching them strut and posture in real life, that was an entirely different experience. As Asher sat on his bed, lost in thought about the countless scenes of arrogant nobles being humbled that he might soon witness, a soft knock echoed from the door. "Come in," he said calmly. The door creaked open, revealing Lyra, who stepped inside with a folded cloth draped neatly over her arms. "This is your attire for the party, young master," she said with a gentle smile, extending it toward him. "What do you think?" Asher examined the garment briefly, then gave a faint nod. He didn't dwell on the details. If Lyra had selected it, that was more than enough for him. Her choices had never failed him before. After all, she had basically been picking Asher's clothes since his birth. Rising from the bed, Asher walked over to the wardrobe, standing silently against the wall. With a swift motion, he opened it, retrieved a few garments, and handed them to Lyra. Without needing a word of instruction, she instinctively understood and transferred the items into her space ring. Asher then began preparing a few personal essentials. He wasn't sure if they would come across a river or stream suitable for bathing during the 3-day journey. The customs of this era were still unfamiliar to him, and he preferred to be prepared. Once he had finished, Lyra quietly exited the room. Asher then settled onto the bed, crossed his legs, and began to cultivate, letting his breathing steady as he sank into focused silence. Several minutes passed before another knock echoed from the door. Asher didn't need to ask. He already knew it was Zarek. He had long since learned to recognize people by the rhythm and weight of their knock. Rising from the bed, he walked to the door and opened it. Zarek stood outside, bowing slightly as he spoke with respectful composure. "Everything is ready. 10th Sunday. Asher gave a silent nod and followed behind him. They descended the staircase and moved through a vast, echoing hall. Eventually, Asher stepped outside. The estate slowly came into view, majestic and expansive. Twin water fountains flanked the entrance to the manor, one on each side, their crystal streams rising and falling in a rhythmic dance. Assassins rarely struck so close to their target's home. They preferred to wait, often days into the journey, when reinforcements would be far out of reach and escape routes limited. The wind lashed against his skin, sharp and wild, yet strangely invigorating. Around him, the world blurred in motion, a rush of color and speed that danced at the edges of his vision. Tilting his head upward, Asher's eyes settled on the sky. Wisps of white clouds drifted lazily across the expanse, streaked against the soft blue canvas above. For a moment, he simply watched, silently admiring the vastness, the freedom, and the quiet majesty of the heavens. These horses are far faster than any ordinary breed, Asher observed, eyes fixed on the blur of their powerful strides. The speed was extraordinary, yet unsurprising. After all, Astra had catalyzed the evolution of nearly every living being in this world. Despite the wind resistance, Asher remained steady, his body instinctively adapting, balanced against the rush of air. For a while, he simply watched in silence, taking in the ever-shifting landscape that stretched out before him. Eventually, he lowered himself to a seated position atop the carriage, his expression calm, contemplative. Neatly trimmed grass rolled across the land in soft, verdant waves, while towering trees spiraled skyward, their branches swaying gently as the wind whispered through them. The breeze added a touch of grace to an already breathtaking scene. How vast, Asher mused inwardly. In his previous life, even those within the top 1% of society would have struggled to afford a place of this grandeur. Perhaps only the elusive top 0.1% could claim such luxury. He exhaled softly and shook his head, dismissing the thought. He approached the grand carriage station ahead, its frame imposing, its surface a striking blend of deep black and radiant gold plating. Asher didn't need to guess. This wasn't merely gold-colored paint. No, it was genuine gold, gleaming under the light with unmistakable opulence. So this is how nobles live, he thought, a flicker of surprise crossing his mind. He tried to recall if anyone in his previous life had ever plated their cars in gold or diamonds. He couldn't think of a single one. It suddenly struck him how little he had thought about Crimora's transportation systems. His time had been consumed entirely by relentless training. Somewhere in the back of his mind, he had expected the kind of basic wooden carriage he'd read about in books. What stood before him, however, was anything but ordinary. Two imposing horses stood silently at the front of the carriage, exuding calm strength, as though awaiting a silent command. Beside the carriage, Asher took note of 5 guards stationed vigilantly. Each was clad in polished armor, their long capes cascading down their backs in dignified folds. Embossed on their chests and on the side of the carriage was the unmistakable crest of House Wargrave, a blazing sun, rendered in exquisite detail, its flames seemingly alive. Though Asher could faintly sense traces of aura seeping from their bodies, he couldn't determine their exact life ranks. Their strength was clear, but not easily measured. He turned slightly to glance at Zarek, who stood silently behind him, composed as ever. "Goodbye, Zarek. See you in a few days," Asher said, his tone calm. With that, he stepped into the carriage with steady, purposeful strides. Lyra followed closely behind, her movements graceful and silent. The youngest master is finally leaving the estate for the first time, Zarek thought, the ever-present smile on his face deepening slightly with quiet pride. Across the estate grounds, several maids and butlers had paused in their duties, their gazes fixed on the departing carriage. It was a rare sight. Asher Wargrave, born into legacy and silence, was leaving the estate for the very first time since his birth. "Let's move," came Asher's calm command from within the carriage. The coachman responded instantly, snapping the reins with practiced precision. The horses surged forward, and the grand carriage eased into motion. The armored guards fell into formation around it, their movements synchronized and silent, like shadows escorting nobility into the world. Asher had anticipated an uncomfortable ride, jolting up and down with every bump in the road, but to his surprise, the carriage glided forward with remarkable smoothness. It was clearly engineered for luxury, every detail crafted with comfort in mind. Of course, it made perfect sense. There was no world in which nobles of any status would endure days of travel in discomfort without devising an elegant solution. The journey remained smooth, the only sound accompanying them the whispering roar of wind as the carriage sliced effortlessly through the air. A gentle breeze drifted into the cabin through the open window, where Asher sat, his gaze fixed on the passing landscape. Then, without warning, his hand shot out, gripping the edge of the carriage with extreme ease. In one fluid motion, he pulled himself upward, his body twisting midair with a natural grace. He vaulted through the window and landed atop the carriage roof with effortless ease, as if gravity itself had chosen not to interfere. Asher was fully aware of the risk of what he just did. An arrow loose from the shadows could end his life in an instant. But he also understood the nature of such threats. Assassins rarely struck so close to their target's home. They preferred to wait, often days into the journey, when reinforcements would be far out of reach and escape routes limited. The wind lashed against his skin, sharp and wild, yet strangely invigorating. Around him, the world blurred in motion, a rush of color and speed that danced at the edges of his vision. Tilting his head upward, Asher's eyes settled on the sky. Wisps of white clouds drifted lazily across the expanse, streaked against the soft blue canvas above. For a moment, he simply watched, silently admiring the vastness, the freedom, and the quiet majesty of the heavens. These horses are far faster than any ordinary breed, Asher observed, eyes fixed on the blur of their powerful strides. The speed was extraordinary, yet unsurprising. After all, Astra had catalyzed the evolution of nearly every living being in this world. Despite the wind resistance, Asher remained steady, his body instinctively adapting, balanced against the rush of air. For a while, he simply watched in silence, taking in the ever-shifting landscape that stretched out before him. Eventually, he lowered himself to a seated position atop the carriage, his expression calm, contemplative. As the carriage rolled steadily onward, a mounted guard finally broke the silence. "10th son, forgive the intrusion, but it isn't safe atop the carriage," he said with a respectful tone. Asher, eyes closed in quiet thought, slowly opened them. He turned to the guard and gave a slight nod. With effortless grace, he slipped back into the carriage, his movements fluid and unhurried. "How was your moment of peace, young master?" Lyra inquired from her seat opposite him, her voice calm. "Refreshing," Asher responded briefly. He had little else to add, though he had genuinely enjoyed the wind's gentle caress and the fleeting glimpse of the vast world passing by. The sun dipped beneath the horizon, and the cloak of night began its slow descent, casting the world into shadows. Not once during the journey had they paused for rest, but with darkness now reigning, they had no choice but to halt. Asher stepped down from the carriage, the silver light of the moon catching in the strands of his purple hair, giving them an ethereal glow. The moment his boots touched the earth, Lyra positioned herself a single step behind him to the right, while a guard mirrored her on the left. Asher made no remark about the added vigilance. Night had fallen, caution was no longer a courtesy, but a necessity. Asher's gaze drifted to the horses, a flicker of curiosity in his eyes. They had been running since morning without pause, yet even now, they showed only the faintest signs of exhaustion, just a soft panting as they lay gracefully upon the grass. Around him, the guards moved with practiced efficiency, their motions fluid and precise, as though they had performed this routine 100 times beneath 100 different moons. Under the quiet silver light, tents began to rise. With a faint shake of his head, Asher turned away and stepped inside his tent. Lyra followed silently, her presence a constant shadow. Two guards took position at the entrance, their silhouettes standing firm against the backdrop of the night. With a graceful wave of her hand, Lyra summoned a large bed that materialized in the air before descending gently onto the mat a guard had laid out earlier. "You brought this with you?" Asher asked, genuine surprise flickering in his voice. He hadn't expected such comfort out here in the wilderness. "Your comfort is my priority, young master," Lyra replied with a serene smile. Another wave of her hand, and a polished table appeared, accompanied by a spread of elegantly arranged dishes, warm, aromatic. Asher blinked. "When did you even have time to prepare all this?" "We barely packed anything after the pre-march announced our departure. The chefs couldn't possibly have cooked this on such short notice." He sat on the edge of the bed, pulling the table closer, his curiosity still lingering even as the scent of the food pushed him to dig in. "On the day of your awakening, young master," Lyra replied calmly, "since you spent the entire day in solitude, I took the opportunity to visit the kitchens. The chefs prepared a wide array of dishes from morning until night." Asher took a bite, his expression thoughtful. "Why go to such lengths?" "Because your awakening marked a turning point," she said matter-of-factly. "It was only a matter of time before we left the estate. I needed to be prepared for nights in the forest, or inns whose food may not meet your standards." Asher chuckled softly, a smile tugging at his lips. "I have to hand it to you, Lyra. You really are too good." "It's my duty, young master," she replied, returning his smile with quiet pride. Asher, noticing Lyra standing silently like a statue while he ate, felt a quiet urge to invite her to join him. He knew what her answer would be. She would refuse. But still he asked, better to offer and be turned down than to say nothing at all. "You don't have to just stand there like a statue. Join me, at least for tonight," he said, his eyes focused on the dishes laid before him. Lyra turned her head toward him, surprise flickering in her eyes. The suggestion was almost unthinkable. Servants did not dine with their masters. Still, she answered with composure, "I appreciate the offer, young master, but given my life rank, I can go several weeks without nourishment." Asher didn't press the matter. He simply gave a small nod. Her response was exactly what he'd expected. Despite the closeness they shared, there were invisible lines drawn between them, boundaries that Lyra would never cross, no matter the circumstance. So it's not as exaggerated as those novels claim. Characters with high cultivation going years without food, or abandoning it altogether, sustaining themselves entirely on energy. Asher thought silently. The reality, it seemed, was far more grounded. The tent settled into a tranquil silence, broken only by the soft clinking of cutlery as Asher finished his meal. A gentle golden light flickered within the tent, casting warm shadows along the fabric walls. Asher dabbed a napkin across his lips. Without delay, Lyra gave a small wave of her hand, and the dishes vanished soundlessly into her space ring. "Good night, Lyra," Asher murmured, settling onto the bed, the duvet still neatly draped over him. "Good night, young master," she replied softly. With a subtle motion, she extinguished the light, and darkness embraced the tent like a velvet curtain. But she didn't step outside to stand guard by the tent's entrance. No, she remained within, quietly shifting to a different position. Her presence seemed to melt seamlessly into the darkness, as if she were part of it. Lyra wouldn't risk leaving Asher's side. Not here, not in a forest swallowed by night. This was the kind of place where silence breathed danger, where the right set of skills, abilities, or elemental affinity could turn an assassin into a ghost. And with that, only the soft rustling of leaves remained, whispers in the dark, swaying to the rhythm of the wind's quiet song. Outside, the guards stood silent, their senses honed to a razor's edge, prepared to react to even the faintest disturbance. They all knew one truth. If the tent sun returned with even a single strand of hair out of place, the Wargrave family would tear the Empire apart to find out why. The Wargraves might wear cold expressions and speak with veiled hostility toward one another, but that coldness was reserved for themselves. Should anyone outside their bloodline dare show the same indifference, or worse, hostility toward a wargrave, it was considered nothing less than a death sentence. Yes, the sons and moons of the Wargrave house may wage quiet wars among themselves, vying for the seat of the Primarch, but those battles ended at the family gates. Beyond those walls, they stood as one, unshakable and merciless. But Asher didn't know this. He didn't know that if an assassin were to strike tonight, even if it were killed before reaching him, silenced by a single guard, the Wargraves would still hunt down the assassin's organization and raze it to dust before dawn. The morning sun crested the horizon, gradually dispelling the veil of darkness that had draped itself over the forest. Within the quiet stillness of the tent, Asher's eyes fluttered open, their purple hue catching the soft rays that slipped through the fabric. "Good morning, young master," came Lyra's gentle voice from the side. Asher offered a faint nod before asking, "Is there a river nearby where I can bathe?" He had assumed a stream would be close enough for that purpose, but Lyra shook her head with a knowing smile. "No, young master. I've already taken care of it," she said, gesturing ahead. Asher stepped out of the tent, the warmth of the morning sun brushing against his face like a silent welcome. "Good morning, 10th son," the 5 guards said in unison, immediately bowing in respectful greeting. Asher gave a brief nod. Did anything happen during the night? Any disturbances like an assassin? "No, 10th son," one of the guards replied, his voice steady and respectful. "So, nothing then," Asher thought silently, his eyes scanning the tranquil forest clearing where they had made camp. 3 tents stood in the quiet morning light. The first belonged to Asher himself. The second, slightly smaller and more modest, housed the coachman, an ordinary man among warriors. The third tent, before which Lyra now stood silently, was unfamiliar to Asher. Without a word, he began walking toward it. As he drew aside the flap and stepped inside, he was greeted by the sight of a large, basin-like structure, his makeshift bath, prepared and waiting. Neatly arranged beside it were his bathing essentials and the clothes selected for the day. Asher shook his head, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Of course, there's no way these nobles would ever bathe in a stream or river. With that thought, he bathed swiftly, changed into the clothes laid out for him, and stepped back outside. Returning to his own tent, he had a simple yet well-prepared breakfast before boarding the carriage once more. Without delay, their journey resumed. Second day already. We should reach the capital by tomorrow night, Asher thought, his gaze drifting lazily out the carriage window, his expression steeped in boredom. The silence, the stillness, it all pressed in on him. Am I truly meant to sit inside a carriage for 3 days, doing nothing but stare at trees and sky? The thought lingered like a haze. This stretch of the journey felt endlessly dull, as if time itself had slowed to a crawl. Hours slipped by unnoticed, the sun now perched high at its zenith, casting sharp rays through the forest canopy. The carriage rocked gently as it moved along the uneven path, and for the first time since the journey began, Asher noticed Lyra's gaze shift toward the window. A voice from outside broke the stillness. "Stop the carriage," one of the guards ordered. Without hesitation, the coachman obeyed, pulling the reins and bringing the carriage to an abrupt halt. Asher turned to Lyra, whose posture remained unchanged, calm and unshaken. "Is it an assassin?" he asked, his tone casual, almost indifferent. Then, a moment later, he blinked and let out a soft breath, mildly amused. Why did that sound like I was hoping for an assassination attempt? A wry smile crept onto his face at the thought. "No, young master," Lyra replied calmly. "Merely a cluster of low-level monsters, creatures too dull to know when to attack and when to flee." At her words, Asher rose from his seat and stepped out of the carriage. A quiet curiosity stirred within him. Since his transmigration, he had yet to see a single monster, had yet to witness the world's dangers firsthand. Not even an Emovira, a creature he'd read about, had crossed his path. He hadn't experienced a single battle, not yet. He still has to wait over 3 weeks to see any action within the first training ground. Lyra followed closely behind, walking just behind Asher with the silent grace of a shadow. As he approached the guard station ahead, Asher's gaze swept across the forest, but saw nothing. The clearing remained still. No movement, no sound beyond the rustling of leaves. Yet he was certain they were coming. He trusted that the guards and Lyra had sensed their presence from a distance away. Only one guard dismounted, the others remaining astride their horses. Clearly, the threat did not warrant full mobilization. "What rank are the monsters approaching?" Asher asked, standing near the carriage, his gaze fixed in the same direction the guards were watching. "They're merely whisper-ranked beasts, led by a single echo-ranked pack leader, 10th Son," the dismounted guard replied, already preparing to intercept them. Asher folded his arms, his expression contemplative. So, whisper-rank monsters with one echo. He recalled the hierarchy he had read about. In this world, monsters are classified across 10 tiers. Whisper, Echo, Veil, Fong, Mark, Grave, Crown, Myth, Void, and... But then, a thought struck him, sharp and clear. This was an opportunity. His opportunity. Back in the Wargrave First Training Grounds, he was bound by protocol, forced to wait an entire month before being allowed to face a monster. But here, beyond those regulated walls, such restrictions held no power. Out here, the world was untamed. True, he had never killed before. Even these whisper-rank creatures had been fighting to survive since birth. They would be more experienced, more instinctive, more ruthless. But Asher had something they didn't: superior stats. There might not be another chance like this, he reasoned. Even if I get critically injured, there are 5 guards here ready to wipe them out and pull me back. Lyra, too. She wouldn't let me die. And while there were no healers present, the passive regeneration from Virilis Crimson Pact would restore his wounds if it came to that. The decision solidified in his mind. He would face the monsters. With his current strength, he could likely dispatch them in an instant, leave not a single one standing without taking a scratch. But he didn't intend to. That wasn't the point. He would fight them like he fought Kale. Deliberately. Purposefully. Experience was what he lacked most, and nothing, not stats nor talent, could replace that. He would observe. Wait for openings. No matter how weak the enemy, he would draw everything he could from each battle until his foundation was forged. But that didn't mean he planned to get injured. With that thought solidified, Asher turned to Lyra, who stood silently behind him. He removed his coat and handed it to her. She accepted it wordlessly, her brows faintly furrowing in confusion. But she said nothing, choosing instead to observe in quiet curiosity. Without another word, Asher strode forward, stopping just a step ahead of the guard who had been preparing to engage. "I'll handle them," he said, his voice calm and steady. "If anything goes wrong, you're free to intervene. That is an order." He didn't look back as he spoke. His tone left no room for debate. The guard parted his lips to object, but the words never came. It was a direct order from his son. Even so, if the 10th Son were to be injured under his watch, the consequences would be severe. He hesitated, torn between duty and obedience, then slowly stepped back. At the very least, Asher had granted him permission to intervene if things took a turn for the worse. The moment his foot retreated, the rest of the guards followed suit, dismounting swiftly from their horses. Their hands hovered near their weapons, eyes sharp, muscles tense, ready to spring into action at the slightest sign of danger. Lyra moved forward as well, positioning herself a few steps behind Asher. Her expression remained unreadable, but her aura had shifted, silent, watchful, prepared to protect. No one spoke. No one dared. All eyes were fixed on the young man who stood at the front of the group. They were about to witness it, the 10th Son's first true battle. Asher stood in composed silence, his heartbeat measured, each breath drawn with a focused calmness. In a blink, Virilis materialized in his palm, its blade resonating with a quiet hum, an eager whisper, as though thirsting to taste real blood and cleave through living flesh for the first time. His gaze remained steady as he listened. Leaves trembled in warning, rustling with increasing urgency. Whatever was approaching was fast, and it was drawing near. The instant they emerged from the forest shroud and stepped onto the open path, Asher saw them. Wolves? How predictable. It's always wolves or goblins. First to appear, first to die. The thought edged with irony. The first wolf lunged, its jaws wide open, fangs gleaming as it aimed to tear through Asher's neck in a single, savage bite. But Asher moved, effortlessly, precisely, his body shifting sideways at the final instant, matching the creature's speed with unnerving ease. The beast's maw snapped shut with a sharp crack, biting into nothing but air where Asher's throat had just been. Then, before it could even recover, a silver flash arced across its vision. The wolf froze mid-step. A breath later, its head slid cleanly from its shoulders, severed with such elegance it barely registered the strike before falling to the earth. But Asher was already gone. In the blink of an eye, he was on the move again. The wolves came in waves, surging from the front, flanking from the sides, closing in from behind. A coordinated hunt. Yet Asher didn't flinch. He didn't panic. His body responded on instinct. He bent slightly at the knees, muscles coiling tight, then released like a spring unbound, launching into the air with explosive grace. Mid-flight, his body twisted. Virilis sang once more, its hum rising with anticipation. Then, guided by gravity and precision, Asher descended. With a single forward thrust, the gleaming rapier pierced clean through the skull of another wolf, silencing its snarl before it ever reached him. The moment Asher's feet touched the ground, claws filled his vision from the left, the right, all at once. But Virilis moved faster. With a single, fluid motion, he parried, his rapier slicing through a wolf's extended forelimbs, severing them cleanly. The beast shrieked in agony, but the cry was short-lived. Before it could even collapse, Asher was already in motion, his blade cleaving through its torso, splitting the creature in two. A crimson spray followed, dyeing Virilis red as he pressed forward. The space around him erupted with motion. Slash, thrust, weave, sidestep, footwork. Each step was precise, every movement deliberate. Even with his stats suppressed, Asher moved like a predator among prey, a silver wolf amidst a flock of startled hens. Corpses fell in his wake. Crimson blood soaked the earth, staining brown soil and green grass alike. But Asher didn't slow. He didn't falter. He was still moving. He kept moving. A wolf lunged from behind, aiming for a blind spot, but Asher had already seen it. Omniperception had marked its presence long before it struck. Without hesitation, Asher dipped to the side, his center of gravity shifting seamlessly with the motion. In a single, fluid twist, he pivoted to face the beast's flank. His arm moved, Virilis moved as one with him. From below, a brutal upward slash arced forward. With a wet, sickening rip, the rapier's edge tore through the wolf's abdomen, flesh and muscle parting like silk beneath Virilis' teeth. Asher rose slowly, his posture composed, his breathing unbroken. His white shirt, once pristine, was now drenched in red. Blood stained his arms, splattered across his frame, but his eyes remained calm. The remaining wolves had already halted their assault, their snarls fading into whimpers. Instinct screamed at them. They had chosen the wrong prey. Now, they stood frozen, tails tucked low, eyes wide with primal fear. Their pack formation unraveled, hesitation spreading like wildfire. Asher's purple gaze swept over them, cold and unblinking. He saw it clearly. The fight had left them. Their will to battle was gone, crushed beneath the weight of a single human's presence. There was no need to suppress himself any longer. Nothing left to gain from holding back. So, why not test something else? The wolves barely had time to twitch before Asher vanished. His form blurred into a streak of purple. Lightning laced his body, crackling with raw intensity. A sharp, thunder snap echoed through the forest, searing the air, crackling in everyone's ears. Then Virilis screamed through the air as it moved. Asher had moved. No, he had erased the space between them, crossing the distance in an instant, as though it had never existed at all. Before the wolves could even blink, their existence had already ended. A single thrust, a single slash. That was all it took. But Asher didn't stop. He moved through the pack like a living storm, a blur of steel and purple lightning. Virilis danced with him, clean, efficient, merciless. Blood burst into the air like ink spilled on canvas. Innards scattered. Heads rolled. Limbs fell with dull, wet thuds as he carved through them. In less than 3 seconds, it was over. Asher stood exactly where he had been before, as if he had never moved at all. The purple lightning crackling across his body slowly receded, quieting into a hum before vanishing completely. There was nothing more to gain from these creatures, not power, not knowledge, not growth. He had simply used them to test his lightning in real battle. Whisper-ranked monsters were the lowest of the low for a reason. They had no true abilities, no elemental control, no innate powers. Just claws, fangs, and basic senses like heightened smell and hearing, which they'd already possessed even before Astra's touch had evolved them. They were little more than upgraded beasts, predators to most, prey to Asher. As Asher stood in silent thought, something breached the edge of his omni-perception, a presence deliberate, heavier than the others. He didn't need to guess. He already knew. The Echo-ranked pack leader had arrived. He hadn't forgotten about it. He was merely waiting. Unlike Whisper-ranked creatures, some Echo-ranked monsters had awakened abilities. Others remained mundane, relying on brute strength and instinct. But this one, Asher had already suspected it possessed something more. It was a pack leader, after all. Without hesitation, Asher spun around, Virilis flashing forward like silver lightning to intercept the incoming strike. Then he saw it, Wind. It coiled around the wolf's extended claws, sharpening them into whirling blades of compressed air. The collision came with a soft yet forceful boom, like thunder behind silk. The impact echoed out, spiderweb cracks rippling across the ground beneath their feet. Asher's eyes narrowed. The wind-infused claws slammed into his body, not deep, but sharp enough to tear through flesh. Blood welled from the tears, and mild pain flared in his nerves. Still, he didn't yield. Instead, he increased the strength behind his guard, forcing the beast back, just a few steps, but it was enough to shift the momentum. "It seems I was careless," Asher murmured, his voice quiet but edged with clarity as his gaze fell to the shallow cuts carved across his chest and shoulders, thin lines drawn by wind-based attack. This was the difference. The difference between one who had lived through battles and one who hadn't. Experience. A seasoned fighter wouldn't have fallen for such a thing, would have read the wind before it ever struck. But Asher didn't mind. This was why he was here, to earn that experience with blood, steel, and pain. From the edge of the field, Lyra's eyes narrowed. The moment she saw the wounds, her posture shifted. She prepared to move, hand instinctively brushing the hilt of her weapon. There were no healers among the guards. If the 10th son sustained another hit, especially one deeper, he could bleed out before the battle even ended. She couldn't allow that. But before Lyra's thoughts could fully form, she saw it. The blood on the ground, spilled from slain beasts, began to stir. It rose in thin, twisting strands, as if possessed by will, slithering through the air toward Virilis. The rapier pulsed faintly, its silver teeth edge absorbing the crimson threads like a starving relic. The blade shimmered, and in that moment, the wounds across Asher's chest and shoulders snapped shut with unnatural speed, torn flesh knitting together in seconds, as if time itself bent around him. A small smile touched Asher's lips as he watched the final traces of blood vanish from his skin. But the wolf wasn't watching. It moved, fast and feral, lunging to capitalize on what it perceived as a moment of distraction. A fatal mistake. Asher didn't need to look. Omniperception had already mapped the wolf's every twitch, every violent intention. Even without turning his head, he saw it, clear as day. The moment it sprang, he was ready. Asher's form blurred, a sudden, violent streak of motion. The claws came again, slashing through the air with lethal force, but this time he didn't block. He dipped low, fluid and effortless, the attack sweeping harmlessly overhead. With a single, devastating thrust, the rapier tore through the beast's hind limb. The wolf howled in agony, but Asher didn't slow. In the same breath, he moved, cutting low, and in one clean motion, severing the second hind limb. The wolf crashed to the ground, its rear legs now nothing but ruined flesh and bone. But Asher was already gone again, only to reappear in front of the creature like a ghost stepping through time. Virilis was already mid-descent. With surgical precision and terrifying ease, the rapier cleaved through both of the wolf's front limbs. No resistance, no struggle, just flesh parting beneath divine steel, like a blade through butter. For limbs gone, the wolf's howl rose in pitch, a piercing, agonized cry, as it lay limbless in the dirt. Its body trembled, blood pooling beneath it in thick, steaming rivers. And then it looked up. Fear now filled its eyes. Not rage, not pride, just the cold, primal fear of a predator realizing it was nothing more than prey. But Asher didn't flinch. He moved twice. Two quick thrusts, like flashes of silver lightning, and Virilis pierced both of the beast's eyes. Blood and darkness swallowed its vision, leaving it blind in its final moments. Virilis slipped from Asher's grip, not falling, but floating. It hovered above the wolf's ruined form, humming low and sharp with a metallic resonance. In a flash of silver, it arced downward in a full, graceful swing. A clean decapitation. The wolf's head dropped from its neck with a soft thud, rolling gently before going still. For a moment, Virilis lingered there, suspended in the air, as though gazing down upon the creature that dared harm its master. It hovered in silence, judgmental, almost sentient, before drifting back to Asher's side. It hummed contentedly now, like a weapon that had fulfilled its vengeance. Asher smiled faintly at the display. He said nothing, simply letting Virilis float beside him, its blade still faintly warm with blood and retribution. Asher cast one final glance at the corpse, then turned away, expression unreadable, mind already shifting beyond the battle. Unlike humans, monsters didn't have to train to use their abilities. They were born with them, raw, instinctive, natural. From the very first breath, they wielded their abilities as easily as they breathed. The wolf had been able to coat its claws in wind without effort. But Asher, he couldn't yet coat Virilis in lightning. Not yet. He was almost there. But he could channel it through himself, let lightning wrap around his body like a second skin, crackling along his frame, heightening his speed, sharpening his reflexes. High above Asher's location, nestled within the drifting white clouds and the vast expanse of blue sky, a figure stood silently atop a colossal bird. The figure bore striking golden eyes and hair that shimmered like sunlight. Yet, the creature beneath him was no mere monster. It was an Emovira. Emoviri are enigmatic creatures, divided into two distinct types, positive Emoviri and negative Emoviri. Negative Emoviri are born from emotions such as fear, sorrow, and despair. They are aggressive by nature, attacking anything they perceive on sight. In contrast, positive Emoviri emerge from emotions like love, hope, and joy. Unlike their darker counterparts, they do not attack unless provoked. Though cautious, they are inherently docile, capable of forming bonds with humans. However, taming one is no simple feat. It requires besting them in battle first. As for the negative Emoviri, they cannot be tamed. It is a brutal exchange. Either you die, or they do. There is no middle ground. A crimson cape cascaded down the man's back, billowing gently in the wind. Vambraces adorned his forearms, while leather gloves encased his hands. His legs were protected by polished greaves, and his torso was clad in a radiant golden breastplate that gleamed beneath the sunlight. This was Azarin Wargrave. Behind him stood Zarek, unchanged in appearance, his attire as pristine as ever. He remained dressed in his classic black butler suit, complete with immaculate white gloves, a silent shadow at Azarin's side. At that moment, A broad smile played on Azarin's lips as he gazed down upon the battlefield below. When Asher had departed from the Wargrave estate, Azarin had followed, silently, from the skies above. He had initially intended to abstain from attending the event altogether, but then came a personal message from the Emperor himself, urging his presence. With such a summons, refusal was no longer an option, and so Azarin moved. Yet before heading directly to the venue, he chose to shadow his son's journey, curious to see what would unfold. As he looked down now, pride flickered in his golden eyes. His last son had not disappointed him. Azarin, are you sure that little monster is truly your son? Even you weren't this much of a genius, despite being hailed as a prodigy reminiscent of the ancient days, Zarek remarked, his gaze fixed on Asher below. His tone was casual, far removed from the respectful demeanor he always displayed within the Wargrave estate, especially in the presence of the Primarch. But this was the nature of their bond. Despite the vast difference in their status, one a butler, the other the Primarch of House Wargrave, and one of the most formidable men in the Empire, their relationship transcended titles. In public, Zarek addressed Azarin with the reverence expected of any servant toward their master. But in private, all formality fell away. He spoke as an equal, as a trusted companion, one who remembered the man behind the title. "You're just jealous he's not your kid," Azarin said with a teasing smile, his eyes still fixed on the scene below. "Why would I be jealous of that?" Zarek replied matter-of-factly. "Even if I did have a child, I doubt they could compare to a Wargrave. In House Wargrave, the rules were clear. Maids and butlers were permitted to have families. The no-birth decree applied only to those of the bloodline, not the retainers who served them. I've told you before, go have a child already, so I could be an uncle. I'd even guide him a little. You know, everyone dreams of being mentored by me," Azarin added, his grin widening. "You already have 10 children, Azarin. Not everyone has your stamina," Zarek said calmly. "Besides, would I even have time for my own child if I'm always stuck at your side?" Azarin chuckled at that, but said no more. He didn't press Zarek about fatherhood again. "So what do you think?" Azarin asked, his voice light, yet laced with curiosity. "Think about what?" Zarek replied without turning his gaze. "Now that you've seen his talent, are you considering resignation? Ready to start serving him instead?" Azarin said with a smirk. Zarek let out a thoughtful hum. "What he has is talent and potential, not power, not yet. Certainly not like yours. Besides, why would I give up the privilege of serving the Primarch? Do you realize how much authority and access to resources I'd be forfeiting?" "Oh." Azarin's golden eyes shifted toward Zarek, a playful gleam within them. "So you've been using me to amass influence and power, is that it?" Zarek chuckled, unfazed. "It's only fair. After all, I handle half the responsibilities that should be yours." Azarin gave a small, amused shake of his head. His gaze drifted downward once more, catching sight of Asher's rapier as it floated beside his son, humming softly. "Don't they remind you of us after our first real battle, Ender?" Azarin said softly, his voice carrying a hint of nostalgia. As he spoke, a long spear materialized beside him, its shaft black as night, its edges streaked with crimson. It hovered silently at his side, humming with a low, resonant tone, as though acknowledging his words. Its unseen gaze, too, was locked on the battlefield below. This was Azarin's weapon, his spear. He had named it Ender, a name chosen with intent. Azarin had vowed that he and his weapon would bring an end to anything and anyone who dared to stand in their path. The spear hummed again, deep and resonant, as if speaking in its own ancient tongue. A moment later, Azarin's voice followed. "Indeed, it's a remarkable ability, drawing strength by drinking the blood of the fallen to heal his wounds. I wonder if that rapier has any other abilities." Ender drifted around Azarin, its soft hum intensifying briefly. "True," Azarin said with a nod and a smile. "With talent like his, there's no way that blade only has a single ability." Then, as if moved by curiosity or amusement, Ender turned toward Zarek. It floated toward him and began to circle, humming softly as it did so. It's nice to see you too, Ender, Zarek replied with a light chuckle. Though he responded, he understood none of what the spear conveyed. Only the bonded master could comprehend its voice. Its language was not made for others. Ender hummed again, its sound low and insistent. This time, Zarek didn't respond. He couldn't understand the weapon's language, so he simply turned his gaze toward Azarin, waiting for interpretation. He's telling you to convince me to return and hunt down the sins, Azarin said dryly, sensing Zarek's stare on his back. Apparently, he's had enough of us sitting around for over a week. Zarek wasn't the least bit surprised. Ender had always been battle-hungry. Whenever they weren't fighting, the spear would constantly badger Azarin, urging him to spar with the Dukes or find a new enemy worth its edge. Azarin didn't respond to the spear's complaints. He simply continued watching his son below, allowing Ender to pester Zarek in his place. Though pride filled his heart as he observed Asher, Azarin had sighed more than 30 times that afternoon alone. He had no interest in attending yet another empty celebration. Of course, his wife Lily occasionally dragged him to such events, but that was different. That was her. This, however, was just another gathering of bloated egos and idle chatter, where men flapped their tongues instead of swinging their weapons. Asher turned and walked back toward Lyra and the guards, all of whom stared at him as though he were a monster cloaked in human flesh. What they had just witnessed defied all logic, utterly impossible by their standards. The 10th son had actually emerged victorious, and not just victorious. He had triumphed without a shred of formal training or battlefield experience. It hadn't even been a full week since his awakening, and by protocol, he still had more than 3 weeks to go before he could be deemed eligible to face a single monster in the first training ground. What they had witnessed left them speechless, stunned into silence. None more so than Lyra, who stood frozen at the rear, still clutching Asher's coat in her hands. She had been by his side every day, before his awakening and even after, and yet she had never explicitly seen him train. She knew he was a genius. That much had been clear when he ascended 2 sublife ranks as if it were nothing. But she had neither seen him personally train in the first training ground nor watched him train privately in his room afterward. Her gaze remained fixed on her charge as he approached. His breathing was steady, his stride composed. Those calm, purple eyes and hair made all the more vivid against the backdrop of crimson blood splattered across his form. The guards immediately stepped forward, speaking in unison. "Congratulations on your first battle and first kill, 10th Sunday." Asher turned his gaze toward them and offered a faint smile. "Thank you. My safety is in your hands. However, if we encounter any weak monsters along the way, leave them to me." For a moment, the guards stood in stunned silence. Did the 10th son just say, "Thank you"? The thought echoed in their minds, disbelief written across their faces. One of them quickly composed himself and responded, "Rest assured, 10th Sunday." He then turned to another guard and issued a swift order. "Set up a tent for the 10th son to freshen up. We'll resume the journey once he's ready." With practiced efficiency, a guard broke from formation and began assembling the tent without delay. After bathing and changing into a fresh set of clothes, Asher made his way back to the carriage. "Thank goodness I made Lyra pack a generous amount of my wardrobe into her space ring," he mused, recalling how he had selected some clothes for himself, only for Lyra to store them with her usual efficiency. The moment he settled into his seat, the carriage began to move once more. Up front, the coachman wore a far-off look, quietly lost in his thoughts as he guided the horses along the path. He was clearly fantasizing, perhaps imagining himself in battle. After all, who hadn't dreamed of standing on the battlefield, weapon in hand, forging their legacy? But reality had been less kind. He had failed all 3 of his awakening attempts. No Astra, no ability, just a regular man in a world of powers beyond reach. Inside the carriage, Asher had already settled into his usual routine. Eyes closed, his breathing steady and measured, he slipped into a meditative rhythm. His mind replayed the battle from beginning to end. Each movement, each decision, each strike. He analyzed every moment with sharp focus, searching for flaws, missed opportunities, or anything he could have executed more effectively. This was his process, refining himself, even in stillness. Yet, despite his scrutiny, everything appeared seamless, flawless, even save for one moment, the pack leader's initial strike. That single exchange lingered in his mind, a slight imperfection in an otherwise immaculate performance. Lyra watched Asher intently as he sat in a lotus position, eyes closed, lost in quiet concentration. Her mind was ablaze with questions. She wasn't afraid to voice them, but she knew better than to interrupt what appeared to be training. Then, as though he had read her thoughts, Asher spoke without opening his eyes. "If you have any questions, feel free to ask. I'll answer them to the best of my abilities." He opened his eyes slowly, adjusting his posture as one leg folded over the other with ease. Lyra didn't hesitate. "Was that really your first battle, young master?" She already knew the answer, but she needed to hear it from him. Asher offered a small, confident smile. "I'm sure you already know it was, Lyra, but I'm just that talented, and I train hard enough to back it up." Lyra nodded slightly, then asked what truly intrigued her. "And those blood threads from earlier, what exactly were they?" She had her suspicions. The Wargrave family's weapons were known to possess unique and often terrifying abilities. But guessing wasn't enough. She needed confirmation. "That's Virilis's ability," Asher replied calmly. "It's called Crimson Pact. It heals me using the blood of those I kill." Lyra's eyes narrowed slightly in thought. She had never heard the name Virilis before, but she could safely assume it was the name of his rapier. With that, Lyra continued, asking more questions, curious about the other abilities Virilis might possess. Asher answered each one with a calm voice, withholding nothing. There was no real need to hide anything from her. After all, trust was the foundation of her role by his side. That said, he wasn't the type to share his secrets simply because someone asked. Openness didn't equate to carelessness. Even now, everything he had shared with Lyra remained confined within the four walls of the carriage. In noble circles, discretion was a discipline. Carriages were always reinforced with barriers or enchantments to ensure privacy, preventing even the most loyal guards from listening in. For nobles, conversations were as valuable as gold, and far more dangerous if overheard. And so, the journey continued. Asher passed the time in conversation with Lyra, the hours slipping by as their carriage rolled steadily forward. Whenever a monster was sighted along the way, Asher stepped out to confront it himself. For those beyond his current ability, a single guard effortlessly dispatched them. Frequent stops were made so Asher could cleanse himself of blood, a necessity that, while minor, extended the journey beyond its intended duration. Yet not a single complaint was uttered. How could they complain? They were witnessing something extraordinary, the 10th Sun's growth unfolding right before their eyes. By the time they reached the capital, night had already fallen. The towering gates loomed ahead, bathed in the soft glow of enchanted lanterns. But the city guard stationed there made no move to halt the carriage for the customary inspection. The moment they laid eyes on the crest emblazoned on the carriage walls and the armor of the accompanying guards, they stood at attention and stepped aside in silence. Some insignias spoke louder than words, and this one demanded reverence. Asher and Lyra arrived at the most luxurious inn in the capital, a place so exclusive that a single room cost 100 gold coins per night. Without hesitation, Lyra paid for 2 rooms, one for Asher and the other for the coachman. She and the guards, however, did not seek rest. Instead, they took their positions outside Asher's door, ever vigilant, prepared to respond at a moment's notice to any threat or disturbance. But the moment they stepped beyond the inn's threshold, their roles would shift. From that point forward, their duty to protect would begin in earnest. With Lyra walking gracefully at his right and the coachman at his left, Asher descended the stairs at a measured pace. His eyes flicked briefly toward the coachman, noting with faint amusement the man's surprisingly improved hygiene and the unmissable smoothness of his skin, an overnight transformation that did not go unnoticed. Upon reaching the front counter, The attendant straightened with practiced poise and greeted them at once. "Good morning, young master, madam, sirs. How may I be of service?" The attendant's tone was exceptionally courteous, as expected. After all, anyone capable of affording 100 gold coins per night was either nobility, closely tied to one, or simply wealthy enough to stand among them. "Let us see the food menu," Asher said calmly. With a respectful nod, the attendant lowered his hand beneath the counter, retrieved a neatly folded menu, and presented it to Asher with both hands. Asher studied it for a moment, his gaze skimming over the elegantly listed options. Then, with a tone of quiet decisiveness, he began to order. "For the main course, I'll have the lamb cutlets with minted pea puree. As for the sides, bring the rosemary and sea salt flatbread. And for the wine, aged blackberry mead should suffice." Truth be told, he hadn't heard of any of these dishes before, but the countless memories embedded within him, filled with knowledge of exotic cuisines and refined palates, made the act of ordering appear effortless. Asher passed the menu to the coachman at his side, who accepted it with a smile that bordered on familiarity. Normally, someone in a station would never stand so close, let alone behave so casually around a sun or a moon. But after 3 days in Asher's company, he had drawn his own quiet conclusion. This young master was unlike the others. Even the guards had come to recognize the subtle but undeniable difference in him. Lyra, too, had noticed a shift. Ever since Asher emerged from his year-long lockup, there was something altered in his demeanor, calmer, perhaps, but also very different. She chalked it up to his self-imposed isolation, to the scars solitude often leaves behind. Besides, what right did she have to question the change in him? She was, after all, merely his maid. The coachman wasted no time, ordering a veritable feast without the slightest hesitation. Even Asher raised an eyebrow, mildly concerned whether the man would be able to walk after consuming so much. As for himself, Asher had intentionally chosen something lighter. He intended to explore the city's streets later, sampling whatever local delicacies happened to catch his eye. "How much?" Asher asked, his tone casual but measured. "Breakfasts are included with your stay, young master," the attendant replied courteously. With a slight nod, Asher turned without another word and made his way to a nearby table, taking a seat with the quiet assurance of someone used to being served. The others followed suit. Within minutes, a procession of dishes began to arrive, each plated with meticulous care and aromatic finesse. Everyone dug in. The coachman, overwhelmed by the flavors, ate with such enthusiasm that he teared up at one point, a moment both comical and oddly touching. The guards, however, remained composed and unaffected. It was clear they were accustomed to cuisine of this standard, likely a regular indulgence during their time stationed at the Wargrave estate. Once the meal concluded, Asher rose from his seat, prompting the others to follow. His gaze drifted to the coachman, whose bloated stomach made each step a struggle. With a faint hint of amusement, Asher offered a simple directive: return to your room and rest. "You've earned it." Although Asher had initially considered slipping the man a gold coin and letting him explore the city on his own later, he thought better of it. Who knew what kind of trouble the coachman might stumble into? He might very well go courting death before sundown. It was far safer to have him remain behind, tucked away in his room for the rest of the day. The coachman didn't object. With a contented sigh and a hand resting on his swollen belly, he turned on his heel and trudged back upstairs without protest. Shaking his head in quiet amusement, Asher stepped out of the inn with a composed yet eager stride. Though calm on the surface, there was a spark of anticipation in his eyes. He was finally ready to see the capital for himself. The moment he crossed the threshold, the world seemed to erupt around him. The capital overwhelmed his senses. A cacophony of sound washed over him: animated chatter, the creak of wheels, the clatter of hooves, and the occasional bark of a vendor hawking goods. Voices mingled from every direction, a living symphony of life and motion. People of all shapes, heights, and social standing wove through the crowded streets. Merchants negotiating prices, nobles flanked by guards, children darting between legs with laughter. Carriages rumbled past, some drawn by fine-bred horses bearing elegantly dressed passengers, others tugged by sturdy beasts of burden laden with crates, barrels, and sacks of wares. The architecture was no less varied. Houses and shops stretched outward and upward, crafted in an array of styles. Some were simple stone dwellings with timber frames. Others boasted ornate facades with carved detailing and painted glass. The capital pulsed with vibrant diversity, each corner holding its own flavor. Asher strode forward with quiet eagerness, Lyra walking in step beside him. The guards had already melted into the surroundings, dispersed among the crowd, their watchful eyes tracking his every move, poised to respond at a moment's notice. His gaze swept over each building and stall, a flicker of curiosity dancing in his eyes, an expression like a commoner who had just left the village for the first time and entered the capital by seemingly sheer luck. As for the coachman, he was living a dream. Never in his life had he imagined stepping foot inside such an opulent establishment, let alone sleeping in a room worth 100 gold coins for a single night. Surrounded by silk sheets, golden fixtures, and velvet walls, he could only grin to himself. At this moment, he felt nothing less than royalty, a prince in borrowed splendor. The following morning arrived swiftly. Asher's eyes fluttered open, greeted by the soft caress of sunlight streaming through the window. He sat up slowly, stretching with a yawn, savoring the tranquil comfort of the moment. His gaze swept across the room, lavish in every detail, a testament to the opulence promised by its extravagant price of 100 gold coins. Yet, even in all its grandeur, it still paled in comparison to his room in the Wargrave estate. Asher remained seated on the bed for a brief moment before finally rising to his feet. Yet, the instant his soles touched the ground, a knock echoed sharply through the room. "Can I at least take a step before you knock, Lyra?" he thought, exhaling mentally in mild exasperation. "Come in, Lyra," he called out. The door opened with practiced grace, and Lyra entered, her expression composed, her smile gentle. "Good morning, young master. I trust you slept well?" she asked with quiet warmth. "I did, indeed," Asher replied smoothly. "After all, sleeping in a forest and sleeping in a proper town are worlds apart. Wouldn't you agree?" Lyra's gaze softened, as though intuitively sensing the unspoken concern behind his words, the unease born from threats that lurked in the shadows. "Whatever may come, young master, know that we will always be by your side to protect you," she said with quiet conviction. Asher smiled faintly, a calmness in his eyes. "That much I know, Lyra. I have no doubt in your strength." During one of their conversations on the road to the capital, a pastime Asher often turned to whenever boredom set in. Given that weak beasts didn't appear with predictable frequency, he had casually inquired about Lyra's life rank. To his surprise, she revealed she had attained the Flare Firm Star life rank. Asher found it difficult to comprehend how someone of such strength served merely as a maid. The revelation stirred further curiosity in his mind. Just how powerful must Zarek be, the man known as the right hand of the Primarch? In truth, Asher had no real sense of their capabilities, whether it was Lyra, Zarek, or even the Primarch himself. None of them had ever demonstrated their strength in combat before him, let alone sparred. With a quiet sigh, Asher shook his head, dismissing the thoughts. There was no point dwelling on what he could not yet grasp. "What plans do we have for the day, Lyra?" Asher asked, settling himself before a mirror. His gaze lingered on his own reflection, a confident smile curling his lips as he quietly reaffirmed what he had long believed. His face was nothing short of a jackpot. "No plans, young master," Lyra replied calmly, standing with quiet poise at his side. "The royal party begins tomorrow. Until then, your schedule remains open. So, nothing to do but lounge indoors," Asher muttered, drumming his fingers lightly against the table before him. With a sigh, he rose from his seat and made his way to the bathroom for a quick rinse. As always, Lyra had anticipated his needs. The bath was already prepared. After a brief wash, Asher returned and dressed in a fresh set of clothes. Just as Lyra raised her hand to summon breakfast from her spatial ring, Asher gently stayed her motion. "I've just left the Wargrave estate for the first time since birth," he said, his tone thoughtful. "Let me explore what the capital has to offer, at least for today." Lyra paused, then offered a small nod of understanding. "Do we have a particular destination in mind, young master?" Lyra asked, her tone carrying a note of mild curiosity. "Not really," Asher replied with a faint shrug. "We'll simply walk around for now." In truth, he had no idea where anything was. But that hardly mattered. He intended to wander the capital aimlessly, taking in the sights before returning later. He supposed he could be spending the day training, refining his skills, and pushing his limits. But Asher believed firmly in balance. A life devoted solely to discipline, without moments of enjoyment, was hollow. Staring at himself in the mirror, Asher's figure literally screamed nobility. Not just any noble, definitely a prince or close. "Fetch me something simpler," he said, his voice calm, his gaze still fixed on the mirror. He had no intention of spending the day fending off stares from every direction like some rare creature on display. Today was meant for leisure, not spectacle. Still, that didn't mean he would stoop to wearing the attire of commoners. No, he would don garments befitting a noble, just ones of slightly lesser quality. Enough to tone down the overwhelming impression of status and presence, if only by a little. He knew, of course, that his striking features alone would still draw attention. Some things, after all, couldn't be hidden. A few minutes later, Lyra returned with a set of simpler garments. Asher changed into them with measured ease, and once dressed, he lowered himself into a chair. "Calling the guard stationed outside," he said. Lyra gave a small nod and stepped out, returning moments later with the guards in tow. Clad in heavy armor and armed to the teeth, their presence was imposing, far too conspicuous for the kind of day Asher had in mind. The moment he saw them, Asher sighed inwardly. "If I walk around like this, I might as well carry a royal banner while I'm at it." "I'll be exploring a portion of the capital today," he began, his voice even. "I understand your duty is to protect me, but I prefer not to attract the entire city's attention while doing so." He let his words sink in for a breath before continuing. "So today, you'll change into plain normal attire. You'll follow from a distance, discreetly, each of you positioned separately throughout the area. I want your protection, but without the announcement." His tone was clear, but not unkind, firm, yet trusting. The guards, understanding his words, nodded. Asher told them to head to the bathroom and change there. Turning to Lyra, he spoke. "You too. You won't be wearing your maid clothes today. Also, you wouldn't walk a step behind me. You will walk beside me today." Lyra gave a nod of acknowledgement, then vanished. Within 3 seconds, she reappeared dressed in an entirely different outfit. "How much coin do we have to spend?" Asher asked, unwilling to risk emptying his pockets before the day was over. "I was entrusted with 3 platinum coins prior to our departure," Lyra replied with a calm tone. Asher's steps came to an abrupt halt at the mention of the sum. 3 platinum coins? Truly the mark of a duke's household, to hand out such wealth as if it were common produce. Still, who am I to complain? With that thought, he resumed walking. "Don't forget to bring the coachman along," Asher said as he stepped out. "Our first task today is simple. Sample the cuisine this hotel and has to offer. Everyone's ordering." Lyra walked at his side with casual ease, just as he had instructed. The guards, for now, moved like ordinary travelers, unassuming, unremarkable. "Come, Lyra. There's a world of flavors waiting," Asher said, his pace quickening with sudden enthusiasm. Since when did the young master become a connoisseur of cuisine? Lyra mused silently, yet fell in a step without protest. Asher approached a roadside stall where the aroma of grilled meat lingered thick in the air. Skewers of various kinds sizzled enticingly over open flames. Behind the stall stood a middle-aged man, clad in a well-worn apron, who beamed the moment he caught sight of Asher. "Young man, what'll it be?" the vendor asked with practiced cheer. "I've got all, spiced mutton skewers, chicken liver with onion, pork belly bites. 2 coppers apiece." Asher's eyes danced across the offerings, each one more tempting than the last. Without hesitation, he replied, "I'll have 2 of each." Wealth had its privileges. Why limit himself with choices? The vendor nodded eagerly, his morning already made. 12 copper coins before noon. Fortune was smiling today. He wrapped the skewers in parchment with swift efficiency and handed them over. Fortunately, by some stroke of grace, Lyra had small change on her. Asher was spared the awkwardness of tossing a gold coin at a street vendor and waiting for change that likely didn't exist. Skewers in hand, Asher and Lyra strolled onward, sampling as they walked. A smile bloomed on Asher's face, bright, boyish, unrestrained, as he moved from stall to stall, indulging in every delicacy that caught his eye. At one point, Asher wandered into an adventurer's guild, more out of curiosity than purpose. He wanted to see the famed mission board and observe the so-called adventurers who seemed to spend more time drowning themselves in ale than accepting actual assignments. Naturally, a few among them tried to assert dominance, throwing hostile glances and muttering threats under their breath. Asher, however, remained utterly unfazed. He gave a slight nod to Lyra, who responded with casual brutality, putting a few of them in their place by smashing chairs and splintering tables over their heads. The guild hall rang with a clatter of collapsing furniture and groans of regret. Wasn't fighting in the Hall of the Adventurer Guild the hallmark of every reincarnated beginner adventurer? He was just placing his mark. After a moment of studying the mission board, more to amuse himself than anything else, Asher stepped back out, satisfied. His next destination, the shopping and clothing district, a sector typically reserved for nobles. Though his wardrobe was already well stocked, that minor detail didn't deter him. Today, Asher intended to burn through 2 platinum coins. After all, tomorrow would be spent enduring the company of those pompous, jewel-draped peacocks called nobles. He would depart the day after, and saw no point in conserving the generous funds gifted to him. Naturally, word of Asher's lavish spending didn't go unnoticed. Along the way, a few desperate souls, street thugs hoping for an easy payday, attempted to strike it rich at his expense. Unfortunately for them, they never made it within striking distance. The guards, ever watchful though unseen, dealt with them swiftly and silently, leaving not even a ripple in Asher's peaceful excursion. By the time he returned to the inn, night had already settled over the capital, its streets bathed in the soft glow of lantern light. He paid once more for his room, without hesitation or concern, before dragging himself upstairs, stomach bloated from a day of unrestrained indulgence, not unlike the coachman's earlier feast. He collapsed onto his bed with the unbothered ease of a man who had conquered a kingdom of food and frivolity. A contented smile curved his lips as sleep claimed him, the day's memories still warm in his mind.